Chapter 341 Thousand-Eyed Despair. Quote. Question mark quote. You were a containment target. Charlotte's voice was steady, as she noticed Neo's confused expression. Void window number 8477. It destroyed the Hephaestus clan. She paused and looked towards the window. A massive swirling tornado stood on the horizon. The only survivors of it were Henry Hargraves and Neo Hargraves. Both of you brothers must have gained void affinity from that incident, she stated. Neo's expression remained unreadable. Henry never tried to awaken his godblood. We don't need to worry about him awakening his void affinity. In fact, she looked at Neo in the eye. I think that's the reason Henry doesn't try to awaken. He knows he risks awakening void affinity if his godblood awakens. You, Neo Hargraves, were different. The moment you applied for the academy made your intentions of awakening your godblood clear. With Hargraves Corporation's resources, you could have awakened your godblood even without our help and, maybe, even void affinity, Charlotte explained. Neo's brows furrowed as he processed her words. I was allowed admission so that I could be monitored more easily within the academy. He asked. Yes, Charlotte confirmed. The academy has more than a few dozen paragons and several exalted demigods. We could have put you down instantly as soon as there was even the slightest chance of you going rogue. Anyone with void affinity was like the carrier of a contagious virus. If they were allowed to live in society and they somehow awakened void affinity, they would corrupt hundreds of people, as soon as they awakened, even if they didn't want to. Void affinity users are like a potential bomb that could explode anytime. Risk, Charlotte continued, lowering her gaze. People like you can't be allowed to live in the same space as the public. She turned toward the window once more. Void was dangerous and powerful. That's why you were allowed admission to the academy, a place where powerful demigods are within a moment's notice distance. Neo remained silent for a few seconds. He opened his mouth after collecting and organizing his thoughts. Why are you helping me if I'm dangerous? You even sent a Templar from the Temple of Death to help me in Auburn. Because it's not your fault if you have void affinity. Charlotte looked at him with a kind smile. The soft glow of the office's ceiling lights reflected in her calm, steady eyes. You never asked for it. We are monitoring you, true. But it's for others' safety. We don't have any negative agenda against you, and we will help you as much as we possibly can, Charlotte said. Got it. Neo stood up. His chair creaked slightly against the polished floor as he moved. He decided to leave the principal's office with Jack, who had been silently observing the exchange. Neo stopped at the doorstep and turned around. The cool breeze filtering through a nearby open window ruffled his hair slightly. What's the name of the void entity who destroyed the Hephaestus clan? Neo asked. The Angel of Thousand Despairs, Valkyria, Charlotte replied without hesitation. She saw no reason to hide the information. Neo froze. Come again. Valkyria, the Thousand-Eyed Despair. That thing defeated the exalted demigods and the paragon demigods of the Hephaestus clan. Neo asked again to confirm. Yes. Is there any problem? Number. It was just my curiosity. Neo stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo faintly in the quiet hallway. Valkyria. Did it become strong enough to fight exalted demigods in the present? His thoughts churned as he walked. Thinking about it logically, Valkyria's strength made sense. After Daniel saved the world, Valkyria was not able to invade Earth. It must have gone to other planets and destroyed them, using them to grow stronger. Neo. Jack called out to him. He didn't say it. Worried Charlotte might hear it, but his gaze said plenty. You have met Valkyria somewhere, haven't you? Jack did not think Neo had Valkyria with him. Neo wasn't yet strong enough to defeat a being who could kill exalted demigods. Let's go. Neo decided to remain silent. The duo walked through the long corridors and stepped out of the building. The sky outside was painted in shades of deep orange and purple, the setting sun casting long shadows across the academy's courtyard. A cool wind brushed past them, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh air. What are you going to do now? Neo asked Jack. I'll rest for a bit. The trial sucked everything out of me, Jack chuckled. What about you? Going to meet others? Neo's eyes narrowed. He couldn't read Jack's thoughts. Jack had countless voices inside his head, thanks to being a darkness user, and it made his intent entangled. Neo couldn't pinpoint which intent belonged to him. He couldn't read Jack's thoughts unless he concentrated hard. Not like I'm trying to read his thoughts. I respect people's privacy. Besides, I don't need mind reading to know what he is thinking. Lying now, are we? Neo asked Jack. It was clear Jack was going to train. Jack smiled bitterly. How do you know that? Magic. Jack scratched his cheek. He let out a sigh, as if relenting. Fine. I'll do as you say. So, where are we going? The cafeteria for now, Neo said. I'm hungry. We'll go meet others after that. Neo doubted his friends were in the academy. If they were, they would have come to meet him already. They were probably at Hargrave's mansion, waiting for Neo and Jack to return after they recovered from the fatigue of the shadow trial. The duo entered the cafeteria. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and savory dishes, while the faint clatter of trays and utensils created a rhythmic background. The line was not long since it was the holiday season. Warm light from chandeliers bathed the room, casting a welcoming glow on the polished wooden tables and marble floors. Jack didn't get much attention in the academy, since most demigods were good-looking. Neo and Jack ignored others. Neo, however, was the center of attention. Some of the demigods recognized him. They wanted to approach him and talk to him. But the air around Neo sent shivers down their spines, and they decided to stay away. Neo and Jack ignored others. They looked around the cafeteria and noticed someone. Morrigan. She was sitting in her usual seat, stuffing herself with bread as usual. Crumbs littered the table around her plate, and a half-empty glass of juice sat nearby. Neo walked towards her with his tray, followed by Jack. They stopped before her. Morrigan raised her head. She looked at Neo, then Jack, then back at Neo. Wukum ba. Her words slurred as she spoke while trying to chew. Pieces of bread puffed out her cheeks comically. Neo and Jack looked at each other. They couldn't hold back and laughed. Quote. Morrigan tilted her head, her brows furrowing slightly. Why are you two laughing? Some things never change. It was just funny to see Morrigan being herself. The sight made them realize again they had left the hell-named shadow trial. A faint sense of relief washed over them. Okay, Morrigan said, still confused. Chapter 342 New Goal. The trio ate together. The atmosphere remained light and casual. The sound of utensils scraping plates and murmured conversation created a comforting backdrop. Jack noticed Neo's crumpled expression a while later. Why are you frowning? I am thinking how many dishes I can cook with these same ingredients. You can cook. Jack was surprised. It was his first time hearing about this. Yes, I can. Think of me as a royal chef, Neo said with a chuckle. The corners of his lips rose upward. He didn't notice Morrigan's curious gaze when he spoke. The trio left the cafeteria after having their fill. The sun outside cast long shadows across the cafeteria's courtyard. Suddenly, Jack spoke up. You guys go meet others. I'll go to Professor Rundle first and have him alter my physical age. I will wait for you. It's fine. Thank you. Neo understood it was Jack's excuse for being alone. He clicked his tongue and nodded. Jack left before he could change his mind. Instead of going to Professor Rundle, he returned to his room. The space was dimly lit, with the faint hum of the air conditioning unit filling the silence. Jack plopped onto his bed. His body sank into the mattress. A deep sigh left his lips. The light in his eyes disappeared, replaced by an empty gaze. Away from Neo, Jack didn't need to act any longer. He didn't need to act as if he was fine. Damn it. He covered his face with his hand. Tears spilled from his eyes, tracing damp trails down his cheeks. He missed Emma. She must have forgotten him after Neo changed the timeline. But she was alive. It was his only relief in despair. Damn it. Damn it. His tears didn't stop. He had continued to ignore Emma's advances for decades. It wasn't because he didn't like her, but because he was worried he would say yes to her. The reason he left the Awakener Association and joined Titan was the same. He had been trying to put some distance between him and Emma. Damn it. If only he hadn't said his feelings out loud back then. If only he had kept the distance between the two of them. Maybe he wouldn't be feeling lost and helpless right now. I miss you. After drying his tears, Jack stared at the ceiling with an empty gaze. He raised his hand as if stretching it towards the sky, trying to hold something that wasn't there. Power. If he had been strong, he could have protected her. He wouldn't have to let Neo carry the burden alone again. He wouldn't need to be protected again. Haha. I used to think why Neo was so obsessed with strength, but I guess I now know why. Power. It was the only truth. A few hours ago, Neo stood outside the cafeteria with Morrigan. Are you going to go after him? She asked, staring at Jack's retreating figure. No, he needs to overcome this himself. Neo trusted Jack. He wouldn't succumb to despair. Shaking his head, he turned to Morrigan. I'll be going back to my house. Are you coming? Going back? She looked at him up and down, scanning his body. Her sharp gaze lingered on his disheveled appearance. You are going back looking like this. Like this what? Like a caveman who came out into the civilization after decades. Quote ellipsis quote. Neo cleared his throat. It's not that bad. It will give them a heart attack. Morgan sighed. During the time spent with Felix and others, she noticed each of them cared about Neo. They knew he was a reckless person. But they couldn't hate him. He was the type of person who would give up his life if it could help his friends. He always helped them without asking anything in return. Even during the Shadow Window mission where Leonora and Christian died, it was only due to Neo that others survived. Back then, he stayed behind to help Jack even though it meant putting his life on the line. Maybe because they understood how much Neo cherished their friendship, they also deeply cared about him. Okay, stop right there, Neo said, being able to read Morgan's thoughts. His face scrunched up. Never think like that again. It gave me shivers. You can do mind reading. No, but your face said plenty about what you were thinking. Morgan stared at him. She felt something was amiss with his explanation. What should I do now then? Neo asked, trying to divert the topic. Get a haircut first. Okay. Neo took out his device. He bought one before coming to the cafeteria, to look for a shop nearby. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face as he scrolled through options. Before he could book an appointment, Morgan stopped him. I will do it. What? The haircut. I'll give you one. Are you good at it? Yes. Neo looked at her with suspicion. Have you done it before? No. Neo ignored her and focused on his device. The quiet determination in Morgan's eyes didn't waver. She placed her hand over his screen to stop him. I won't mess up. Trust me. No. Last time Neo trusted a guy, he fucked his own ancestor and almost created a paradox. You won't cut my. Neo noticed Morgan's fierce expression. Her face said she wasn't going to back down. Fine, he relented. I will just use a hair growth elixir and get another haircut if she messes up. Don't worry, you won't need to use a hair growth elixir. Quote ellipsis dot. You can read minds. No, but your face said plenty about what you were thinking. Morgan grabbed his hand and pulled him towards her room before he could change his mind. The corridor echoed with the sound of their footsteps as they moved past rows of closed doors. Her room was not far. She made him sit on a chair by the window, where sunlight poured in, casting a warm glow over the room. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Morgan tied a cloth around him to keep his hair from falling on his clothes. Chapter 343 Haircut. Her movements were precise, as if she had done this 100 times before. I always wanted to try this, she said, noticing his expression. Neo nodded with a stiff smile when her hand brushed against his neck. The Morgan in the novel was interested in cutting people's head, not hair. Calm down. She is different from the Morgan in the novel. Neo glanced at his reflection in the nearby mirror. His expression was one of resignation. If this goes wrong, I'm blaming you. Don't worry. I'm a professional. A professional with zero job experience. Neo kept his thoughts to himself. Morgan summoned aura scissors made of lightning. Her control of her aura was excellent, evident in the way the lightning danced precisely along the shape of blades. But lightning would burn his hair. Neo stiffened, his body slightly leaning away from her. Before he could voice his protest, Morgan condensed her aura further. The electric glow faded, replaced by a sleek pair of scissors gleaming in solid gold. The air around them grew warm with the energy. She can condense her aura into physical substance already. His brows furrowed. She is growing too fast. Condensing aura into physical objects signified high control of elementals. It was an advanced skill that required exceptional precision. But it had no direct relation to strength. Neo remained silent and let her proceed. The sound of the scissors snipping through his hair was oddly soothing. Despite his initial apprehension, Neo had to agree, she moved like a professional. It didn't take her long to finish. How is it? She asked. It's good, Neo replied, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The golden glow of the scissors dissipated as Morgan stepped back, arms crossed, watching him expectantly. His hair now reached only his shoulders, long enough to sway with his movements but no longer cumbersome like before. He took a bathe after the haircut. Bright, sterile light illuminated the polished tiles as Neo stepped into the shower. The droplets cascaded over him, and washed away the stray hairs clinging to his neck. He took out his device while in the shower. He scrolled through the internet while resting his head against the tiled wall. I can't decide if this is good or bad, he murmured, his voice muffled by the steady patter of water. Nothing had changed. Neo frowned, his finger idly scrolling. After Neo left the shadow world, he had a single question at the forefront of his thought. Had his actions in the past caused changes in the present? After several searches, he found no differences. The present seemed the same. Either I was too lucky, and the events did not create any butterfly effect. Or the butterfly effect has been created, but I can't find it. Or, what I did in the past was what happened in the original timeline too. Neo massaged his head. I guess I'm not going to find answers anytime soon. While taking a shower, he looked at his own body. With intent, he could look at himself from an omniscient point of view. His arms, torso, legs, neck, and even his fingers had scars. He chuckled softly. I used to think scars would look cool, but these look ugly. His fingers brushed over the uneven skin on his forearm. I guess a scar in reality is different from imagination. Neo wasn't ashamed of his scars. They were the proof of his defiance. Proof he never gave up. Well, I guess I don't have scars in at least one place, he muttered to himself, chuckling. His back. Instead of scars, a symbol of a dragon biting its own tail was etched on his back. Neo had ensured no attack ever landed on his back. The reason? It were Kane's words. A scar on a swordsman's back is his shame. As my student, I hope you will never bring shame to yourself or your sword. Kane's teachings always remained with him. Neo didn't think Kane would have blamed him if he had scars on his back. After all, he was fighting enemies for centuries who surrounded him and attacked him from all sides. An attack or two landing on his back would have been understandable. But Neo had made sure no attack ever touched his back. Not because he wholeheartedly agreed with Kane's philosophy, but because he respected Kane enough to uphold his wishes and values. The bath helped him sort his thoughts and focus. He stepped out after a while. His damp hair clung to his face. He used Shadow Robe spell to create clothes. This looks good enough, I guess, he muttered, looking at himself. Neo moved toward the laundry space where the bathroom opened. He noticed men's clothing hanging on the wall with a note. Wear these. I doubt your clothing choice will be good, seeing what you were wearing until now. The full-sleeved clothes, along with a jacket, minimized the exposed scars. He didn't understand if it was Morgan's consideration or coincidence. After changing into the clothes Morgan prepared for him, he stepped into the main hall. Morgan turned towards him. She looked at him while pondering something. What is it? Neo asked. Don't tell me I still look weird. No, I was just thinking it was a good choice to choose a bigger number. Quote ellipsis dot question mark quote. I asked Henry for your clothes sizes and then bought a few sizes bigger clothing. Neo was surprised when he heard her. He had grown, but he was supposed to be ageless. It didn't take him long to realize the reason behind his change. Ascension and rank ups. Those are counted as evolution, not aging. My body must have matured when I ranked up and ascended. Morgan stood in front of him while he was drowned in thoughts. She used her hand to measure his height. Yes, you've definitely grown a few inches. Compared to the you before you entered the shadow world. Thank. Before he could complete his words, Morgan leaned towards him. Neo was taken by surprise. Morgan ignored his expression and stretched her hands towards the back of his head. She tied his hair back, leaving only a few strands to fall across his face. After making a few adjustments, she retreated and looked at him up and down. This is better. So this is why you gave me that haircut, Neo said, seeing how he looked using intent. He had been confused given the weird haircut he had. But he had to agree, it looked good after she tied up his hair. You. Morgan looked at him, unpleased. Why didn't you say it if you thought the haircut was weird? I didn't know it was for tying my hair up. Neo shrugged. She was about to say something when Neo opened his mouth. Why are you helping me so much? Morgan froze. She looked around as if searching for an excuse. Quote ellipsis exclamation mark quote. Her eyes lit up. I'm your fiancé. It's obvious I would want you to look good. Her voice grew lighter, and she stopped speaking when she noticed Neo's expression. Finally, she sighed. You said you could cook good food. So you're doing this to owe me a favor and then. Neo didn't complete his words. Chapter 344 at Death's Door. Still, it was obvious what he would say. Morgan clicked her tongue and looked straight at him. Yes, that was the plan. What about it? Neo didn't know whether to laugh or cry, seeing her glare. Nothing. I was just curious, he said. Let's go. There is something else I need to do before we can return home. Neo left the dorm building. The crisp, cool air greeted him as he stepped outside. He walked with Morgan toward a small shop nestled between two tall buildings. He went into the shop and bought a mermaid plushie. What's that for? Morgan asked. Professor Anna, Neo said, recalling Elizabeth used Anna as an alias in the academy. He moved toward the building where Elizabeth was being treated last time. The guard at the gate stopped them. Neo had to prove his identity before he could be allowed entry into the premises. Sorry, but we cannot allow you to enter, Morgan, the guard said. Only the ruler Neo Hargraves has been given permission by the principal. Sure. Morgan didn't understand why Neo was taking a plushie for their homeroom teacher and why she was not allowed to visit her. But she kept quiet instead of questioning Neo in front of everyone. Neo entered the building. The cold marble floors echoed with each step as he made his way toward Elizabeth's room. He opened the door of her room. Ellipsis exclamation mark. Neo nearly flinched. The door was sealing Elizabeth's intent and aura. What the hell? Neo had trouble breathing when Elizabeth's powerful intent pressed down on him. Charlotte's and Elizabeth's intent were on an entirely different league. It was like comparing a sniper and a missile. Neo felt he would pass out if he did not leave soon. He clenched his jaw and entered the room. There was no way he was leaving without seeing her. The air grew denser and heavy with the pressure of Elizabeth's intent, making it almost unbearable to stand. It was hard to breathe, and his limbs felt heavier than mountains. Neo tried to calm his trembling body. He placed the mermaid plushie next to her bed and looked at her. Elizabeth was unconscious, and Amelia was nowhere to be seen. Her condition is a lot worse than I was told about. After growing stronger, he could see a lot more. There was hardly any pulse of life left within her. Neo fused his blessing and life elemental into intent. He tried to transfer them into her body. Each moment within the room caused crushing agony to surge through Neo's body. Standing in front of Elizabeth's intent was similar to being flash-banged continuously, only it caused physical and soul pain instead of blindness. Neo tried to resist her intent. His blessing and life elemental accelerated her healing. But, fuck, it was far from enough. What Neo was doing right now was no different from using a tap to fill an ocean. My life element mastery is far from enough. Neo's expression crumbled when he noticed void corruption on Elizabeth's soul. The corruption was weak. It couldn't spread. But it would kill her given time. Neo tried to use the holy element to erase the void corruption. Again, it was useless. Something that could harm Elizabeth was not anything he could heal. Fuck. Neo's expression crumbled. He had sent her to eliminate the Temple of Void. After she came back hurt, he told the principal she would survive. She isn't going to survive. Neo's mind churned. Can we ask for help from an exalted demigod with healing skill or high mastery in life and holy elemental? No. That wouldn't work. If it was possible to ask for help from someone like that, the principal would have done so already. Elizabeth had countless enemies. If it was known she was alive and not killed during the Mermaid Country incident, her enemies would spare no effort in killing her. Neo wasn't strong enough to protect her. Fuck. He bit his lip. Unknown to Neo, the world powers had an inkling that Elizabeth was alive. Their idea stemmed from the fact Neo was immortal and had tried to save Elizabeth from the curse in the Mermaid Country. Although it was said he failed, there was a chance he succeeded. After Elizabeth destroyed the Temple of Void, the traces of her battle were left around. Now, it was an open secret that Elizabeth was alive and she was on death's door. The only reason world powers hadn't moved to kill Elizabeth was Charlotte. A few months ago, Charlotte had invaded Zeus' clan and warned them. It happened because they tried to kill Neo through Lucas's hand during the Shadow Window mission. They were not taking any action yet due to her warning. The principal of the Demigod Academy had warned that the Academy would go to war if something similar happened again. The world powers did not wish to antagonize the principal. They were not taking any action yet due to her warning. But, it was only a matter of time before someone made a move against Elizabeth. Fuck, this is making me feel like shit. Neo clenched his fists. To heal Elizabeth, he needed to improve his life and holy elemental mastery. And it would take a long time. Time Neo didn't have unless he was okay with Elizabeth dying. Her soul might not even enter the underworld. There was a high chance the void corruption would kill her completely. Wait, there is one place where I can improve my life and holy elemental mastery quickly. Underworld. Neo made his choice. He had been planning to go to the underworld already. He had to meet with Leonora and others, and he needed to give a visit to his father and ask him questions. A few minutes later, Neo left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and the presence crushing him disappeared. Neo had to focus to make sure he didn't flop down from exhaustion. He wiped his sweat and returned to Morrigan. Ellipsis. Trivia. Luck stat increases with ranking up from one grade to another. Chapter 345. He has changed. You met her? Morrigan asked. Yeah, Neo answered. The duo returned to the Hargraves mansion. The media was lining outside the gates of the academy and the Hargraves mansion. Cameras flashed incessantly, and reporters clamored for information. It was not a problem for Neo and Morrigan. They used a cab, and the media didn't realize it was them in the cab. It didn't take them long to reach their destination. Times like this made Neo think it was a good choice that the academy and Hargraves mansion were in adjacent cities. As the cab approached the mansion, the towering gates, wrought iron and gilded with the Hargraves family crest, slowly opened. Neo and Morrigan stepped out of the cab. The cool evening breeze carried the faint scent of freshly trimmed hedges from the landscaped gardens. Felix, Mars, Sean, Clara, Arthur, and the butler were waiting outside the door of the main building. A faint smile appeared on Neo's face. Memories of their last meeting surged in his mind. I think something similar happened long ago too. He thought but kept it to himself as he walked toward the group. Neo, you're back. And Morrigan too. I thought she said she was busy, Felix said. We met in the cafeteria. Oh, cafeteria. Of course, you met her there, she said in a flat tone. Morrigan ignored Felix's jab. Her expression remained stone cold. Her piercing gaze briefly scanned the surroundings before resting on the group. Where is Jack though? I don't see him, Arthur asked with furrowed brows. He is busy. He will see you guys later, Neo replied. His tone carried a note of finality. Let's talk inside. I'm exhausted. Ah, right, Felix said quickly, stepping aside to make way. The group moved into the main building. Only Mars remained motionless. His gaze was fixed on Neo, and a frown was etched on his face. Mars. Felix called out to him. Something's wrong. Mars didn't look at Felix. He addressed Neo directly. Neo, what's your current rank? Quote ellipsis. Quote. The group's smiling faces froze. They had been trying to give Neo space and planned to ask about the shadow trial slowly, but Mars had done the opposite. A palpable unease settled over them. Felix opened her mouth. Mars, not right now. Peak Empyrean demigod, technically, Neo said. Mars had asked for his rank, not his combat strength, and that was what he revealed. Mars seemed unconvinced. His instincts had never been wrong. And right now, Neo seemed unfathomably powerful. As if he was God. Still, he did not pursue the topic further. The group's tension lingered, but they collectively decided to let it go, for now. They sat inside the main hall. Neo had lunch dinner with them. When he asked the butler why Henry was not with them, the butler said Henry was busy with something. The aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked bread lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of aged wood and wax polish. The dinner was cheerful. The mood was light. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings as they exchanged stories. Clearly, everyone wanted to know about the shadow trial. Neo, however, had no intention of revealing anything about the shadow trial. Sensing he didn't want to talk, no one tried to question him about it. Where are you going? Arthur asked as Neo stood up after dinner. To meet brother, Neo said. And you guys, go get your gears. I'm going to test you. Test us. Sean spoke up. For what? The exoskeleton bone surgery. I told you I'll help you guys get one if you defeat me, remember? We'll have the fight now. What? Felix sprang up. But we barely got any time to prepare. Besides, you are already peak Empyrean. My talk with brother shouldn't take longer than 5 minutes, Neo said, cutting off Felix. Everyone was surprised by Neo's attitude. He seemed to have changed. The light-hearted atmosphere from earlier dissipated as a quiet tension filled the room. Neo ignored their confusion and went upwards to meet Henry. The staircase spiraled toward the upper floors. He knocked on the door at the end of the corridor. Come inside, Henry's voice came. From the other side, Neo entered the room. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, and the powerful intent of Henry hit him like a tsunami. A faint orange glow from a desk lamp barely illuminated Henry. He was seated in a leather chair with a cigarette between his fingers. Neo's body froze. His senses were bombarded with too much information from the intent. He felt like he was being stared at by a monstrously powerful, malevolent entity. The oppressive force pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Henry noticed Neo's condition. His brows furrowed. He put down the cigarette and called back his intent into his body. Huff, huff. Neo could finally breathe again. He staggered back slightly, as his hand clutched his chest. If Henry had been a second late in suppressing his intent, Neo would have died. I need to learn how to seal my intense senses. Or I am going to be flashbanged every time I meet a powerful person, Neo thought. Come, have a seat, Henry said. Thanks. Neo sat before Henry. You weren't there during the dinner. The Templar you messed with after returning from the shadow trial complained to her master. To the senator. Yes, Henry nodded. He took a puff and continued, I was busy handling that matter. I see. Wow, look at this fucker. Not even a sorry for giving me extra work. Thanks for taking care of it for me. Henry raised a brow. He looked at Neo, not expecting him to say, thank you, when he asked for a sorry. He burst into a chuckle. Seems like the shadow trial taught you a lot. More than I had bargained for. I see. I see. Henry nodded and rubbed the cigarette into the ashtray. Wisps of smoke curled upwards, dispersing into the air. So why did you come to see me? I can't come to meet my own brother without having a reason. Neo asked. I missed you. We met like 8 or 9 days ago. It was longer for me. Henry sighed, leaning back in his chair. The sound of the leather creaking under his weight filled the brief silence. That's why I didn't want you to go to the shadow trial. That thing is a hell. You've gone there. I haven't, but I know some people who did. This time, Neo raised his brows. Coming back from a shadow trial was a monumental feat. Only a handful had achieved it in the Earth's history. He knows someone like that. Neo wondered. Or is he talking about someone from the outside? Neo didn't voice out his thoughts. Henry shifted his gaze to the laptop screen. An incoming notification blinked. He began to type on the keyboard while talking to Neo. So what's the real reason you came to meet me? I said I missed. Bitch, get out if you are going to waste my time. Quote ellipsis dot quote. Neo smiled bitterly. It seemed like Henry had more or less an accurate grasp of his personality. I wanted to ask about mom and dad. Chapter 346 Tell me everything about mom and dad. Henry didn't show much reaction. He kept his eyes on the screen and opened his mouth. Yeah, what about them? Our dad was Hades and our mother was Persephone. Henry stopped. His fingers froze over the keyboard, and he raised his eyes to look at Neo. The tension in the room thickened. Who told you that? That doesn't matter. What I want to know is if you know what I am talking about. Quote ellipsis dot. I don't. I guess you do. It's clear by your reaction. Neo leaned closer. What I want to know is why our parents, who were gods, lived and died like mortals, and why the fuck no one had any idea they were gods. Neo's voice was sharp. As far as I know, everyone from the Hephaestus clan and their acquaintances used to treat them like normal unawakened demigods. Quote ellipsis dot quote. Henry remained silent. He stared at Neo with an unreadable gaze. Are you going to give me answers? Or should I get them directly from Dad when I meet him in the underworld? You can go to the underworld that easily. Henry asked suddenly, surprised. Yes, I'm a Grim Reaper now. Kind of, Neo said, recalling that the timeline where he became a Grim Reaper was erased after Daniel's countless regressions. Kind of, Henry asked, noticing the nuance in his words. His brows furrowed slightly. I don't know about it myself. I need to meet other Grim Reapers and ask them about my position. But that's not the point right now. Why did mom and dad act like mortals when they were gods? And why are we both like this? Henry's silence was deafening, broken only by the faint clicking of the clock on the wall. Neo's eyes burned with frustration as he pressed further. I have barely any talent, and you were physically weak during childhood and had trouble awakening your god blood. Shouldn't both of us be more talented if our parents are gods? Neo questioned. Henry closed his laptop. The soft click of the screen shutting echoed in the quiet room. He took out another cigarette and lit it. The sharp scent of smoke curled through the air as he took a puff. The dim glow of the desk lamp flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the room. I guess it's time I tell you about these things. He stood and walked towards the window. His eyes were fixed on the void window number 8477 that loomed far on the horizon. Firstly, mom and dad themselves did not know they were gods. They were born as humans, and they lived as humans. Henry took another puff and closed his eyes. They recovered their memories only on their deathbed. Deathbed. Yeah. Henry's gaze became distant as he recalled the last moments of their parents. You might not remember this because you were injured back then. Saying Neo was injured was an understatement. He had been on the verge of death thanks to void corruption. After the void entity killed everyone, it moved towards us. It would have killed us too, if not for Dad injuring it lethally, Henry explained. How did they recover their memories? Neo asked. I don't know, Henry answered. Neo frowned. He recalled the meeting of Hades, a reincarnation of Hades, and Zeus, which he had seen during the third vision of the Sphinx. Hades had said something like, "We would meet again," to Zeus back then. It seemed Hades was aware he would reincarnate. In both cases, Dad seems to know who he is during the moments of death. Is it that he can recall his identity as a god only when he is about to die? Henry did not notice Neo's confusion. He continued. While Dad was holding back the void entity, Mom healed us both and brought us out from the window number 8477 in. Henry's voice wavered slightly. He took another puff from his cigarette. His hand trembled just a bit. She died as soon as she brought us to safety. What about Dad? Neo's voice was barely above a whisper. Henry shook his head. The words he couldn't say lingered in the air like a ghost. He did not survive either. He turned back to the window. The reason I think both of us have low talents is because our parents were mortals, until they awakened their memories at least, Henry said. Silence blanketed the room. Neo went over Henry's words. His mind churned. Something is weird here. When Neo was in Shadow World, the Grim Reapers of Underworld told Daniel that Hades always remained within his castle to protect. If Neo's dad was in his palace in the Underworld, how was he reincarnating in the world of living? Does Dad have a way to be at two different places at the same time? Neo kept his thoughts to himself. Is that all you know? Yes. Thank you for answering my questions. Neo stood up to leave. The creak of his chair sounded unusually loud in the quiet room. He expected Henry to say something like, "Look at this little shit, leaving as soon as he got what he wanted, even though he said he was here as he missed me." Henry remained silent, contrary to his expectations. His eyes followed Neo as he walked to the door. After Neo left, Henry let out a long sigh. Fuck, he muttered under his breath. He massaged the scar that ran across his face. The silence of the room broke when Henry suddenly frowned. Shut the fuck up. I don't need your moral lessons. I lied to him, but it was for his own good. His voice was filled with irritation, and directed at the empty air. Damn it, you blabber so much that it gives me a headache. The room seemed to grow colder. Why are you even talking? He paused. His gaze narrowed as if he was listening to a voice only he could hear. What do you mean you sensed a similar presence on him? Henry's voice grew sharper. His eyes darted toward the door Neo had exited moments ago. Are you sure it was something similar to you? He had not peeked into Neo's shadow space as he respected Neo's privacy. After listening to it, he seemed to believe Neo was hiding something in his shadow space. It's fine. I don't mind if he is hiding something. He is old enough to make his own decisions, he said to no one. Ellipsis. Neo walked down the long hall. His mind kept returning to what he had heard from Henry. He learned two things from it. Mom and Dad seem to recover their memories right as they are about to die. They don't recover their full strength. If they could, I doubt they would have failed to kill the void entity that wiped out the Hephaestus clan. Neo's parents had been defeated by the void window. Void window number 8477. It was visible from anywhere on the continent. Many demigods had entered it, boasting they would avenge the Hephaestus clan. None had returned. The void window remained impenetrable to this day. However, unlike normal windows that grew over time, its size never expanded. Neo's thoughts came to a halt as he stepped into the backyard of the mansion. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot gave way to the earthy scent of the forest that spread beyond. Towering trees framed the area. His friends stood in a clearing ahead. Their faces were taut with tension. They carried weapons and wore sleek combat gear. Neo's gaze landed on Felix, who held a gun tightly in her hands. You bonded with the true soul weapon already? He asked. Chapter 347 Battle. The group exchanged wary glances. Neo studied them for a moment before continuing. I'll suppress my strength to peak awakened demigod. It's a rank you all can defeat easily if you fight together. As Neo spoke, a dark, oppressive energy began to emanate from him. The grass at his feet wilted slightly, as if recoiling from the aura. His aura surged like an invisible tidal wave. He condensed his death aura into a solid pendant and he tied it securely around his neck. The pendant, dark as obsidian, glimmered faintly. If you guys can break this pendant before I take all of you down, you will win. Is that enough for a handicap? The group's expressions turned grim. Even if Neo suppressed his stats, he was leagues beyond them. His advantage in reaction speed, combat experience, stamina, and physical defense made him nigh undefeatable. Are you really planning to fight us? Mars suddenly broke the silence. Why are you asking? Worried. No, Mars replied with a wide grin. I'm just excited. Without warning, flames erupted around Mars. The heat distorted the air. The dry grass beneath him ignited, crackling loudly. His body became a blur as he bolted toward Neo. It's fine if we start now, right? Mars shouted. Yes. Neo twisted his head just in time to dodge Mars' blazing fist. The strike whizzed past his cheek, leaving a faint scorch mark in the air. Mars twisted mid-motion. His arms moved like snakes as he attempted to grapple Neo into a chokehold. It was a diversion and his aim was to steal the pendant. Before Mars could complete the move, Neo's fist shot forward and dove into Mars' abdomen like a battering ram. Mars' body arched. He flew backward like a ragdoll and crashed into the ground, skidding to a halt amidst the singed grass. No one moved for a few seconds. What are you guys doing? Neo's voice boomed. It resonated with such force that the surrounding trees seemed to tremble. Mars created the perfect opportunity for you to attack me by surprise. Why didn't you move? Are you guys waiting for me to tell you to attack? Neo's glare made them flinch. He always maintained a cold expression, rarely allowing even a faint smile to cross his face. Despite his apathetic persona, he spoke to everyone politely. This time, however, was different. It was the first time anyone saw Neo furious. The atmosphere grew suffocating as Neo's bloodlust surged. The wind seemed to die, leaving only an eerie stillness in the air. Ha! Neo let out a disappointed sigh. Two of you are absolute geniuses, one can control time, one can control space, and another one has a true soul weapon, he said. His cold gaze moved, landing on each of them in turn. Arthur, Mars, Sean, Clara, and Felix. I know this fight must be sudden, but try to fight, at least. Or are you guys hoping that the enemies you face in the future will always be within manageable levels? Neo abruptly stopped. A faint smile appeared on his face. Yes, fight like that, he said. The sound of a sharp blade slicing through the air came without warning. Neo stepped back just in time. The sword missed him by inches and slashed through the spot where he had stood moments ago. The air next to Neo distorted like ripples in a pond. Arthur had been hiding, using his air mirage spell to stay concealed. A flicker of surprise crossed Arthur's face as his sneak attack failed. He had left a mirage clone to distract Neo while he prepared to strike from behind. Arthur launched a flurry of attacks. Meanwhile, Mars took advantage of the distraction. He slammed his fist into the ground. Massive flames erupted. Walls of fire roared to life, engulfing the area. The heat warped the air, and visibility plummeted as smoke curled around them. Sound kaleidoscope. Arthur chanted a spell. Suddenly, the clearing was filled with a cacophony of noises, footsteps, the clash of blades, and indistinct shouts. The sounds came from all directions, disorienting anyone who heard them. Neo used one hand to parry Arthur's sword attacks. Then, with startling speed, Neo's free hand shot out. He intercepted Mars' punch aimed at his nape. The impact of Mars' flaming fist against Neo's palm created a brief shockwave that extinguished some of the surrounding fire. I thought you wouldn't attack me from behind, Neo said. That's exactly why I attacked from there. Mars retorted with a wide grin etched on his face. He pushed forward with another fiery strike, then another. Arthur jumped in before Neo could attack Mars and allowed Mars to retreat. Elemental energy roared in the surroundings. Two eastern flame dragons coiled around Mars' hands. Their scales shimmered like molten lava. Fire dragon technique. Flame fist. Mars lunged forward again, punching toward Neo. The serpentine fire dragons surged toward Neo. They spiraled around him, leaving no room for escape. The heat they emitted was suffocating, causing the nearby grass to smolder and blacken. At the same time, Arthur used his air affinity to amplify the flames, feeding them oxygen to grow even larger and more intense. They turned into infernos. Their flames hungrily ate the air. Neo remained unfazed. He summoned a massive sphere of water. The water rippled and swirled as he directed it to douse the flames. Steam hissed violently as the water collided with the fire. The dragons devoured the water ball with ease. I can create a stronger water ball, but that would mean using strength beyond awakened demigod rank, Neo thought as he assessed the situation. His grip tightened around his sword. Divine swordsmanship 5th. Before Neo could complete his incantation, an invisible force yanked at Obidus. The sword wrenched itself free from his grasp and flew through the air. Psychokinesis. Is that Clara? Neo wondered. Clara's voice echoed, confirming his suspicion. I've got his sword. Now, he can't use that sudden burst of strength of his. This is our chance. Get him. Neo raised an eyebrow. It seemed they had been strategizing and looking into his weaknesses. Seems like they know I use Obidus to remove my debuff, he thought. The fire dragons closed in. Their blazing maws snapped hungrily at Neo. He quickly conjured a coffin of darkness and remained inside it. The dragons crashed against the coffin repeatedly. Sparks flew as fire clashed against darkness. Suddenly, the space around Neo began to ripple and distort. A massive surge of space elemental energy swamped him. Neo vanished. The coffin of darkness became empty as he reappeared high in the sky. Oh, Neo muttered, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Claris' mastery of space element seemed to have reached adept low rank. Don't be impressed just yet. Arthur's voice rang out from above, carried by the wind. Neo, still plummeting through the sky, tilted his head upward. He saw Arthur, who had been teleported even higher, standing confidently in midair. There's a lot more to come, Arthur declared, raising his sword high. Golden lightning coiled tightly around the blade. Invincible. Arthur's aura erupted like a blinding star. The golden lightning wrapped around him flared. His sword cut downward in a deadly arc. Neo, still in midair, noticed another surge of power from below. His eyes flickered to the ground, where Mars stood smirking. Fire dragon technique. Flame fist. Mars unleashed an attack. The flame dragons were larger, and denser than before. Clearly, Mars had been holding back earlier. Neo found himself trapped between the two attacks, the golden lightning from above and the blazing fire dragons from below. That's a good strategy, Neo muttered. He raised his hands, one toward Arthur's lightning and the other toward Mars' fire dragons. Neo's aura darkened. He used his shadow affinity. Chapter 348 Battle 2. Black flames surged from one hand, twisting into a massive tornado of burning darkness. It descended upon the fire dragons like an hammer and crushed them. From his other hand, black lightning crackled and shot toward Arthur's golden lightning. The collision shook the air. Shockwaves thrashed around wildly. Neo and Arthur were thrown off course by the sheer power of the blast. Neo flipped midair and landed gracefully on the scorched ground below. Meanwhile, Clara quickly swapped Arthur's position with a stone using her space affinity, teleporting him safely back to the ground. Your last attack was better, Neo began, but his words were abruptly cut off. A silenced bullet tore through the wall of flames and struck Neo in the temple. Neo barely flinched. Tisk, I missed, Felix muttered, lowering her sniper rifle. She had been made invisible using Arthur's spell, and was waiting for the perfect moment to take her shot. The bullet was meant to destroy the pendant Neo wore, exploiting his distraction after he dealt with Arthur's and Mars' combined attack. Sean, do it, Felix shouted urgently. Sean closed his eyes and focused inward. The energy within his core churned violently. Using his time affinity, Sean reached out to the river of time. A massive, invisible wave slammed into him, threatening to sweep him away. He struggled to push forward, swimming against the overwhelming current. Time became a blur. Weeks, months, maybe even years seemed to pass. His resolve wavered, but he pressed on. Just a bit more. Suddenly, the sensation disappeared. Sean's eyes snapped open. Huff, huff. Sean's eyes snapped open. Huff, huff. He had successfully traveled back in time by 6 seconds. He looked around and saw Neo falling from the sky. Arthur's and Mars' attacks sandwiched Neo. Neo, however, was prepared to retaliate. Felix, Sean called out. His chest heaved as if he had just run a marathon. Time traveling took a huge toll on him. He had done it only 3 times during this battle. It made him feel as if he was on the brink of death itself. His body screamed in protest, and his limbs felt heavier with every passing second. Did I miss? Felix's reached his ears. She stayed hidden, her sniper rifle steady, cloaked by Arthur's invisibility spell. Yes, Sean panted, gasping for air. Huff, huff. You aimed a bit high. The bullet hit his temple. Huff. Got it, Felix responded quickly. Okay, you should rest now. I can. Sean began, but his words were drowned out by a deafening explosion in the sky. A massive shockwave rippled across the battlefield, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The air shimmered from the intense heat, and small fires erupted on the trees around them. Neo and Arthur were thrown off balance by the force of the blast. Neo flipped in the air and landed gracefully on the scorched earth. Clara swapped Arthur's position with a nearby stone, teleporting him safely back to solid ground. Your last attack was better. Neo words abruptly cut off. A silenced bullet tore through the flaming walls with pinpoint accuracy. It flew straight for the pendant around his neck. Neo reacted instantly. His hand shot up, and he caught the bullet between his fingers just before it reached its target. Come on, really? Neo's gaze swept the area. You've regressed 1, 2, 3 times now, and you still use the same attack. He held the bullet up for them to see. You should have tried to change the pattern after I dodged it the first time. Felix, still cloaked by invisibility, felt a bead of sweat slide down her temple. Neo's words confirmed her fears. He knows Sean has been regressing. That means his time element mastery is at least expert level. She swallowed hard. The shadow trial Neo had gone through must have been a nightmare, if it forced him to grow to his current level of power. Get back, Felix. He can see you. Arthur's shout cut through the air, snapping Felix out of her thoughts. She prepared to retreat when Neo raised a hand. Okay, that's enough. Neo dusted off his clothes. I've got the gist of your current level. We can stop the training. Training. Felix froze. Neo's true aura burst out from his body. The sheer intensity crushed the surrounding miles of forest, flattening trees and sending wildlife scattering in terror. The ground beneath him cracked and trembled. The once lush greenery was reduced to ash and dust. Everyone was forced to their knees by the oppressive weight of his presence. Mars' flames were extinguished in an instant. Arthur's invincible skill shattered. Neo's shadows began to stir. From the inky blackness, a humanoid shadow monster emerged. It had the body of a human and the head of a dog. Get them to stand in line, Neo said. The summon bowed to him before moving towards others. It picked everyone up one by one and placed them before Neo in a neat line, standing side by side. Neo didn't retract his aura. He made sure it was just barely enough to not kill them. Although his current method seemed harsh, it would help them face stronger enemies and not be rattled by their auras. You need to get used to this, Neo said. Stronger enemies won't be as forgiving as I am. He turned to Sean. Sean, good work. The use of your time affinity was excellent. You just need to work on your stamina. Oh, okay. Sean's head bobbed weakly in a nod. Practice by doing short time travel dozens of times, Neo said. Neo's gaze shifted to Clara. Clara, I'll be honest, you surprised me the most. I never thought you would reach such a level in space affinity in just a few months. I had some help, Clara replied with a weak grin. She tried to raise her head to meet his eyes, but Neo's aura pressed down on her like a mountain. Even attempting to smile felt like an impossible task. That's good. You supported everyone with good timing. Are you planning to shift from being a damage dealer to a support role now that you can use space affinity in battles? Neo asked. I'm thinking about it. Tell me when you are sure. I'll give you a training manual. Neo passed her and stood before Arthur. His gaze bore into him like a drill. How many elements did you use during the fight? Air, sound, and lightning, Arthur answered through his gritted teeth. Exhaustion was threatening to drown him after his invincible skill was forcefully cancelled. He was struggling to stay awake. How many elements have you awakened? 12, Arthur replied. Why didn't you use them? No. Time. To use, and low. Mastery. I see. Neo gave a short nod before moving on without further comment. Arthur frowned, confused by the lack of advice. Next, Neo stood before Mars. Mars, you need to work on your team skills. Your walls of flames blocked my vision. It was a good trick. But the walls of flames were a bigger hindrance for your teammates than they were for me. Mars nodded. Unlike his usual chatterbox reply, he listened carefully. Finally, Neo stood before Felix. I thought you said you could use the true soul weapon. I didn't see you using it. Chapter 349 Beneath. I did use it, Felix said. She held up her sniper rifle for Neo to see. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath and spoke in her mind. Beneath, change your shape to a handgun. Okay Tilda, responded the snake-shaped spirit resting lazily around her neck and shoulders. Only Felix could see the snake-shaped spirit. It was the spiritual manifestation of Beneath, the youngest spirit among the 4 sister spirits used to create the 4 true soul weapons. The sniper rifle began to shift. Its form morphed and transformed into a sleek handgun that fit snugly in Felix's hand. The bullets are formed from my divine energy, and Beneath can change its shape depending on. Is that how you told her to use you? Neo asked the spiritual manifestation of Beneath. The snake spirit emerald eyes widened in surprise. You can see me? It asked with its tongue flicking nervously. I can, Neo replied. The snake's tongue flickered again, and its face contorted into an expression of wonder. Why you can see my spirit? Felix asked. I can see it. Maybe I can do it as our spirits are sisters, Neo explained. But I can't see your spirit, Felix said. Mine doesn't like to stay in a spiritual form. Neo replied. A flood of foreign emotions surged within Neo's mind. Refusal, shyness, doubt. Huh. Neo froze, his thoughts interrupted by the sudden intrusion. Do you mean you didn't manifest until now because you were too shy, worried if I would like your appearance or not? Yes, came the hesitant reply. Neo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Don't worry about those little things, he said gently. I will like you no matter how you look. More emotions surged through him, carrying a sense of bashfulness. Before Neo could say anything further, Venith let out an audible click of her tongue. What? Neo asked, turning his attention back to the snake spirit. For a brief moment, the spirit regarded him with a look of pure disgust before quickly masking it with a forced smile. I was just wondering what you meant by saying my master was not utilizing me perfectly, Venith asked. The others were unable to hear the spirit. They exchanged confused glances but chose to remain silent. I will explain it now. First you need to return to your original shape, Neo said. The spirit stared at him. It took no action. Felix sighed, shaking her head slightly. Just do as he says, Venith, Felix said. Understood, Master, the snake spirit replied obediently. Neo frowned as he observed Venith's compliance. Look at this fucker. It didn't even tell Felix how to use itself properly, and it's acting submissive like that, he thought. The gun in Felix's hand transformed smoothly into a bullet. Neo stepped forward and grabbed it. Felix, every true soul weapon has a unique ability. So my weapon's unique ability is shape-shifting. No. Neo shook his head. Shape-shifting and infinite growth are abilities common to all true soul weapons. What I'm saying is every true soul weapon has its own unique ability. He threw the bullet towards Mars, who stood a few feet away. Mars, drop your blood droplet on it, Neo instructed. Okay. Mars replied, confused. Blood already trickled from his lips, thanks to Neo's presence pressing down on his shoulders. He wiped his thumb against the blood stream and rubbed it onto the bullet. Venith's expression twisted. It clearly didn't want to reveal its ability. However, Neo's piercing gaze suggested he already knew the secret, leaving Venith with no choice but to comply. The bullet, Venith's physical manifestation, began absorbing the blood. The crimson liquid disappeared into its surface like water into dry sand. Is it absorbing my blood? Mars asked, surprised. Yes. Now give it back to me, Neo said, extending his hand. Mars complied, handing the now blood-infused bullet to Neo. Neo turned to Felix. Do you have a gun? Why yeah, Felix stammered. She carefully loaded the bullet into the chamber of her handgun. Shoot it at that tree, Neo said, pointing at a massive tree standing far from their location. Its trunk was thick and gnarled. Felix's heart raced. She had an inkling to what the Venith's unique ability and it excited her. The gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet shot through the air in a blur of motion before slamming into the tree. A split second later, it exploded into a burst of flames, engulfing the tree. Flames. Felix muttered as she struggled to suppress her excitement. Venith's unique ability is to copy a power of anyone whose blood it absorbs. The power it can copy depends on Venith's current level of strength. Since Venith is weak right now, it could copy only flames of Mars, Neo explained. Felix's eyes were shining with fascination. Her brows furrowed suddenly as a thought struck her. But I shot the bullet already. Do I have to go and pick it up before using it again? She asked. That would be a problem during the fight. Quote ellipsis dot. Haven't you been training with Venith for weeks? You should know by now it will return to you if you will for it to return, Neo replied. Oh, I didn't know that, Felix admitted sheepishly. So how do I do it? Neo looked at her with a weird expression. He clicked his tongue before answering. Just close your eyes and think of calling it back. Felix nodded and did as she was told, closing her eyes. A beat later, she felt a sudden weight in her hand. She opened her eyes to see the bullet, Venith's physical manifestation, resting in her palm. Wow, true soul weapons are awesome, Felix muttered in awe. She glanced at Neo. As the ability it gains from blood permanent. It's one-time use, Neo answered. Despite his response, Felix was almost bouncing with excitement. She believed the reason why Venith hadn't told her about its unique ability was due to the fact Venith was a young spirit, and it was unaware of its own unique ability. It's good, right? Neo asked. Yup, it's the best. Felix replied, not noticing the subtle shift in Neo's expression. Chapter 350 Killing Felix. Arthur flinched as he caught sight of Neo's face. Neo ignored him and spoke to Felix. Felix, I think you understand why true soul weapons are precious. He asked with a serious tone. I do. Felix exclaimed, still excited. She failed to notice the coldness in Neo's gaze as he continued. That's why you need to prove to me you are worthy of that weapon. Huh. Felix blinked in confusion. Her excitement faltered. Venith can make a beggar into a king. I can't waste on someone who has no drive to improve, Neo said. Felix stared at him, stunned. Neo, of course, understood how wrong his words were. Mars had bought Venith with money and given it to Felix. The weapon belonged to Felix and Felix only. Neo had no control over its ownership. However, true soul weapons, especially Venith, are dangerous, he thought grimly. Either Felix conquers it, or Venith will turn Felix into her puppet. Neo had to force Felix to grow stronger. That was the only way Felix would not fall to Venith's mind manipulation. What are you trying to say? Felix questioned. The Academy's ranking tournament will happen soon. You got second rank last time thanks to Arthur's help. Maintain that rank in this tournament without any help, Neo stated. Felix chuckled nervously. She stopped when she realized Neo wasn't joking. Me. Rank 2. That's impossible. True soul weapons are technically spirits. Neo continued. But unlike normal spirits that die with their users, true soul weapons don't. Of course, true soul weapons will follow you to the underworld too, but they won't get erased if you die in the underworld again. I can take the weapon from you there. What? Felix struggled to process his words. People could die in the underworld. Neo could go to the underworld. Her mind raced as a nervous smile crept onto her lips. Are you saying you will kill me to take Venith's ownership? She asked hesitantly. I'm glad you catch on quick, Neo replied in a voice devoid of emotions. That has to be a joke. Wait. Sean suddenly jumped between Neo and Felix, forcing a distance between Neo and Felix. His wide eyes darted towards Neo's hand resting on his sword. Sean turned to Felix with a desperate expression. Say yes. Huh. Why do you look afraid? Felix asked. Say yes. Sean shouted, grabbing her shoulders. Felix flinched at his sudden forcefulness. Are you okay? I just regressed. Sean's breathing was ragged. His chest heaved as his bloodshot eyes darted between Neo and Felix. His voice cracked with urgency. Please say yes, or. Felix froze. She understood the meaning of his words. Her eyes slowly moved towards Neo's hand, still resting on the hilt of his sword. The glint of metal sent a chill down her spine. She raised her gaze to meet Neo's cold eyes. Her heart hammered in her chest. The oppressive weight of Neo's presence made it harder for her to breathe. I hope that makes it clear that I was serious, Neo said. Felix couldn't answer. Her lips trembled. Neo had killed her. Sean had regressed to stop him. What would you have done if Sean had not been able to regress? He is too tired. What if he had failed? Felix asked, her voice shaky. I would have died. Neo clicked his tongue in irritation. The sharp sound cut through Felix's stupor like a whip. Are you fucking kidding me, Felix? What would I have done if Sean hadn't regressed? Neo's pressure increased manifold. Felix felt a few of her bones snap under the strain. A gasp of pain escaped her lips as she was forced to her knees. She braced her hands against the ground to stop herself from being completely crushed. Neo crouched in front of her and looked into her eyes. The first thing that came to your mind was what I would have done. Do you even take a moment to think about what you would have done to protect yourself? He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him even as the pressure threatened to pull her gaze downward. I could understand it before. You weren't talented and had no way to grow beyond your limits. But what now? Neo's voice grew sharper. Why didn't you think that you wouldn't be helpless now if you had trained diligently with Venith? Better yet, do you realize I killed you because you said you would never be able to get the second rank? Why didn't you say you could get the second rank? Neo questioned. There is why you, Mars, Arthur, Morrigan, and other God clan members. There is no way I can win against everyone, she stammered. You have the true soul weapon. Felix couldn't meet Neo's eyes. Her head hung low. Shame and despair weighed on her shoulders heavily. She had accepted, deep in her heart, that she could not grow stronger. History's weakest demigod. That was her nickname. She was the butt of joke for everyone, whether they had awakened their godblood or not. I have said my piece. Neo stood up. If you fail, I will take the true soul weapon from you. Neo stared at Felix. He hated the way he had treated her. However, it was better to force her to grow stronger. Venith was dangerous. The spirit would try to take over Felix if Felix couldn't get it under control. Felix had to be strong if she didn't want to be devoured by Venith. Neo's gaze shifted to Arthur. The latter was glaring at him, his body trembling as he tried to rise. A few moments ago, he was desperately trying to stand up and shield Felix from Neo, only stopping when Neo stood up. Neo ignored Arthur and swept his gaze over the group. I used my true aura to subdue you all. But it was only at the rank of an awakened demigod. You guys lost. Since Neo had gone through countless tribulations, his aura, even if he suppressed his strength to awaken demigod rank, was enough to knock out mythic demigods. I will give you one last chance. Neo stepped toward the devastated forest. The forest behind the Hargraves mansion was large, larger than a dozen stadiums combined. This place should be good enough, Neo thought. Neo's aura surged. It filled the region of the forest that was destroyed during the earlier fight. The aura of death began to condense. It transformed into a metallic platform. Chapter 351 New Challenge. The platform spanned half the size of a football stadium. Neo manifested an intent clone in the center of the platform. If you guys can defeat that, you can get an exoskeleton surgery. Neo announced. The group's shock over Neo's treatment of Felix dulled their initial surprise at seeing the clone that looked exactly as Neo. That clone is as strong as a grade 3 mythic demigod, so stronger than the me who fought you guys now. Neo stepped onto the platform. This platform is made of death elementals. Stand on it for too long, and you die. This will force you to defeat my clone as quickly as possible. You can fight my clone from outside the platform too, but then, the clone will use the strength of a grade 5 Empyrean demigod. The rules were clear. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Neo finally retracted his aura. The oppressive energy dissipated. Seeing how depressed everyone looked, Neo wondered if he had been too harsh on them. Just as he was leaving, Felix called out to him. What about Nathan? Huh. Neo paused, glancing back. He isn't here right now. But he isn't excluded from this training, right? She asked with a grin that carried a hint of mischief. The others looked at Felix in shock, surprised she was trying to drag Nathan down with them. Neo smiled faintly. He was happy to see Felix was back to her usual self. Don't worry about him. He has got it worse than you. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. Felix tilted her head, confused. That little shit is with Nathan, Neo added. Felix blinked, puzzled. There was only one being Neo referred to as little shit. The caterpillar. His manifestation of the time element. It's with Nathan. Why? Felix asked. Nathan was in Auburn country, right? Neo questioned instead of answering. Auburn was one of the few countries where dark-type element users were not discriminated against. Auburn had always been a haven for them. It was one of the reasons why most families that excelled in dark-type elements, like Jackson Nathan's family, lived there. When the dragon-ranked crack formed in Auburn, Nathan had been with his family. Beelzebub. It's the little shit's name by the way stopped time in Auburn to eat as much as he could. But there is a limit to how long Beelzebub can stop time. Neo explained further. Sooner or later, he will have to let go of time stop. Then he won't be able to eat as much as he is eating right now. Naturally, Neo let his words hang. Felix continued in a voice tinged with exasperation. Beelzebub knows authorities will come for him if he raids stores while time stop is not working. So, he will approach Nathan and make him cook food. Felix questioned, not knowing what kind of face to make. Yeah, Nathan cooks good food, Neo replied with a smirk. Felix recalled the times when they would return from academy missions, and Nathan would cook for everyone. His small but cozy kitchen would always be filled with the comforting aroma of freshly prepared dishes. Back then, Nathan's mistake had been showing off his skills to Morgan and Neo's caterpillar. Since that day, he had been approached by the two whenever they felt hungry. Morgan, at least, had a bit of decency. She didn't approach Nathan much, respecting his space most of the time. However, Neo's caterpillar, shameless and gluttonous, was a different. The tiny creature had no reservations about showing up uninvited, demanding food as if it owned the kitchen. Felix shook her head, chuckling softly. Nathan must be cursing his life right now. First, a dragon-ranked crack appeared in his country, next he was approached by Beelzebub. Neo, of course, wasn't entirely certain if Beelzebub was currently with Nathan. But given that Beelzebub had neither contacted Neo nor attempted to return, it was highly probable. Demigod Academy. Amelia entered the room. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air. She placed her books on the table and sat next to her mother. Elizabeth lay unconscious on the hospital bed. The machines connected to her beeped continuously. If not for those rhythmic sounds, Amelia might have thought her mother was already gone. Her eyes glistened with tears as she gazed at Elizabeth's face. Mom, why is it always you? Her voice trembled as tears rolled down her cheeks. Her sobs echoed in the room. She grabbed Elizabeth's hand and tightened her grip. Minutes later, she wiped her tears hastily and stood. Just as she turned, her eyes caught sight of a plushie sitting neatly on the bedside table. A little mermaid doll. A frown creased Amelia's face. Where did the plushie come from? She quickly reached for her device and dialed the guard's number. Did someone enter Professor Anna's room while I was away? She asked in a sharp tone. Yes, the guard replied after a pause. It was the ruler of the first year, Neo Hargraves. Amelia froze. Hello. The guard's voice brought her back to reality, sounding confused by her silence. Got it, she muttered curtly before cutting the call. Lowering the device, she mumbled to herself. Neo came here. Her mind raced. She was already aware of the dragon-ranked crack that had appeared in Auburn. Rumors had been swirling that it had formed due to Neo's return. So it was really Neo, she murmured with a conflicted gaze. Ellipsis. Hargrave's mansion. Neo entered the mansion. His mind continued to go back to the earlier moments. Servants quickly stepped aside, lowering their gazes as he passed. He entered the study and immediately called for Jack. Yes, Jack asked. I need you to do something, Neo said. And that is, I've given a task to everyone. After they complete it, take them and meet Luna Barton. Luna Barton? Jack questioned. Who is that? The ex-leader of one of the excavation teams belonging to Hargraves Corporation, Neo clarified. Go on, Jack said. I'm listening. She is trying to drill into the continent's crust and excavate bones of old gods. Chapter 352 Corpse of Oceanus. Old gods. Jack hesitated. You mean them? Yeah, Neo said. The continent's crust was made from the Titan Oceanus. She wants to excavate it and use it since bones of old gods are precious materials. Oh. Jack relaxed upon finding that the bones didn't belong to someone he knew. Why are you even worried? You are a necromancer. I didn't take you to be the type who would hesitate to use bones of someone you knew, Neo said. And you are the inheritor of death, who is planning to revive our friends who died in Shadow Window, Jack said. Neo could almost feel Jack rolling his eyes. About that. What? Never mind, Neo said. Anyway, I called you for a different reason. I want you to take everyone and go to Luna Barton. So you want us to help her excavate the bones? No, Neo said. To be honest. You know what? Let's meet up. I'll explain everything in person. Neo hung up before Jack could question him. The two met in a private cafe a few hours later. The cafe was tucked away in a secluded corner of the bustling city. A soft hum of a jazz melody played in the background, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Neo had booked a private room to ensure they weren't disturbed. The room's walls were adorned with abstract art, and a small chandelier cast a cozy glow over the table. Hey, Neo said. Hi, Jack replied, sitting across the table. His eyes were red and puffy. Neo could sense Jack had cried a lot, but he didn't say anything. Jack glanced around. Neo's choice of a private room showed he wanted this conversation to remain confidential. What did you want to talk about? Jack asked. I'll explain everything to you about the excavation mission, and why I want you to go with others. Neo opened his shadow space. He reached in and pulled out a world map and spread it on the table. Let's look at our world first. It's a single, supercontinent consisting of 79 countries, and 2 island countries. Neo pointed at the center of the continent. What's the size of the continent? Before Jack could say anything, Neo answered himself. 63,579,000,000 square kilometers, Neo said. With that size, roughly 150 old Earths can fit inside our continent. Old Earth was a way of referring to the planet before it underwent any ascension. Old Earth was a STAGE-0 planet, then it ascended during the end of the Age of Gods, becoming a stage -1 planet. Our world ascended again a few centuries ago and became a stage 2 planet, which is the current rank of our world. Neo explained everything to Jack. When the world was a STAGE-0 planet, the peak of strength was Empyrean rank. This rank was a gene limit. No one could go any higher than Empyrean rank until the world ascended. After the world ascended, the next generation's gene limit evolved. The people could grow up to Paragon rank. This included only those who were born after the Earth became a stage -1 planet. Those who were born earlier could not go beyond Empyrean rank. Later, the world ascended to stage -2. The gene limit evolved again, allowing the next generation to reach as high as exalted rank. Neo's finger traced the map, stopping at the continent's edge. Since our current continent's size is so large, do you really think Oceanus's corpse can be the continent's crust? Neo asked. Maybe. I mean, Titans did become gods. Gods are different from the Awakeners, and us demigods. I don't think it's weird for someone among them to be larger than planets, Jack shrugged. Maybe it's time for you to start using that empty head. Gods aren't invincible. They have ranks too. Neo tapped on the map. Our continent's crust is not the corpse of Oceanus. Huh. Jack frowned. She, Luna Bartern, must have some reasons to believe the continent's crust is a corpse, right? I doubt an ex-leader of an excavation team will make a decision like that on impulse, Jack said. There are reasons, actually, Neo replied. He pointed at the Red Sea that surrounded the continent after a few hundred miles of normal sea area. This area was called the Blood Sea. Even going near the Blood Sea could get one killed. The area had highly aggressive monsters, and the place was blanketed in a thick concentration of death elementals. Only peak Empyrean rank demigods and higher could enter the Blood Sea. There was a high chance they would die. Due to such dangerous conditions, no one had been able to explore the Blood Sea completely. Thus no one knew how large the planet actually was. She thinks the Blood Sea is the corpse's blood, Neo continued. And that the continent's corpse is the bones. Her previous team found a few bones during excavation, and they used them to create true soul weapons. Lastly, the deeper you go, the thicker the presence of death elementals grows. This presence of death elementals grow no matter at which location you dig. This is why she thinks it's the corpse of Oceanus, Neo explained. That makes sense. Surprisingly, Jack muttered. His eyes narrowed as he thought it over. I think she is right. If you found the bones there and used them for your true soul weapons, then true soul weapons are compatible with every element, Neo said, cutting him off. Normally, you need to use a special metal that has attunement to specific elements. A sword made from firestorm stone will be compatible with fire elementals. A spear made from aquastars will be compatible with water elementals, Neo said. Quote ellipsis dot question mark quote. Jack tilted his head, confused. What about T? True soul weapons can support every element, Jack. Neo paused before he continued. That includes void element. Quote ellipsis dot exclamation mark quote. Jack froze. His heart seemed to stop. A storm of emotions appeared within his eyes when he heard the word void element. He clenched his jaw. Does that mean? Yeah, the bones belong to someone who was compatible with void element. Since each true soul weapon has a different spirit, that means their bones belong to multiple beings. Jack instantly understood what Neo was trying to say. He opened his mouth and closed it, unable to believe it. Is that possible? It is. But those true soul weapons aren't normal. They can grow infinitely, right? That means the bones they were created from belong to someone very powerful, Jack said. He continued. If it was someone powerful, then it can't be from Earth. I mean, it can be an Earthling who was corrupted by void, but there is a high chance that the bones come from invaders. Monstrously powerful invaders, Neo completed Jack's words. Jack covered his face with his palms and leaned over. He needed time to digest Neo's words. How is our planet even alive? If multiple beings like that attacked, I don't see how our world, survived, Jack said. He recalled the Shadow Trail. It was nightmarish hell. He did not know the identity of void entity that attacked them during Shadow Trail. But he knew that there was only one. A single void entity had destroyed their world. And it seemed the corpse of multiple void entities were below their continent now. Who defeated them? Chapter 353 Corpse of Oceanus 2. We have powerful defenders, Neo said. Silence descended in the room. Jack stood up and paced around the room. The wooden floor creaked beneath his steps. He had found the truth behind many secrets. Secrets someone like him wasn't supposed to know, in just a few minutes. His mind raced with the implications of everything he'd just learned. A few minutes later, he returned to his seat. His face was pale. Sigh, there's a lot I still don't understand, but let's focus on why you called me here. Why do you want me to go excavate the bones? Jack questioned, trying to bring the conversation back to the immediate issue. First of all, there aren't many bones. Luna thinks there are many, but it was a coincidence that she entered the place exactly where the most of the bones are, Neo explained. How many bones are we talking about here? Jack asked. Enough to make over 100 weapons. 100 true soul weapons. Calm down. Not true soul weapons. Spirits aren't so easy to find. I don't think there are any more spirits within those bones. There was a lot Neo didn't clarify. For one, spirits could only be born within living beings. In other words, those void entities to whom the bones belonged weren't dead. Technically at least. They were weakened though. A lot at that. I see. Still, what about the aura of death that Luna Barton found while digging? Jack asked. Luna Barton thought the whole continent's crust was a corpse. The cause was the aura of death that came from everywhere. If the aura of death wasn't from the bones, then from where did it come? Neo looked at Jack with a strange gaze. Do you realize you just asked a stupid question? Neo said. What do you think is present under the world that is releasing the aura of death? Something that is present under the world. Oh. Jack's eyes widened with realization. It's underworld. Wait, but I thought the underworld exists within another dimension. How come it is under the world? It is inside another dimension that exists within the earth, Neo clarified. Jack nodded slowly. The room was silent for a moment. Suddenly, Jack's expression changed as he came up with another question. What about the blood sea? Why does it have an aura of death if it isn't the blood of Oceanus? Blood sea is created by the blood of someone, I think so at least. But I'm pretty sure it's not from Oceanus. You don't know where the blood sea came from? Jack asked with skepticism. I don't know. Jack seemed unconvinced. He didn't pursue the topic further and brought the conversation back to the earlier point. I guess I understand why you want me to go with everyone for the excavation. You want me to take the bones before anyone gets their hands on them. That's correct. Neo nodded and added. To be honest, since the bones belong to void entities, the correct procedure would be to warn the authorities. But I'm sending you guys there. Because it's a good opportunity to train for all of you. And I don't want to share the bones with anyone, Neo explained. Neo had become a proper ascender. Unlike before, he could devour the bones of void entities with true darkness. I wonder how much boost will I get from devouring them, he thought. That's actually a good way for us to train, Jack muttered. His mind raced. He had touched the peak of grade 3 Empyrean demigod rank once before. He could reach that rank again. This time, far faster. Moreover, their world had more resources that could boost a demigod's growth speed. Jack believed he would need only 1 to 3 years to reach grade 3 Empyrean rank, unlike before when it took him 30 years. Seems like he is excited, Neo thought. During the Age of Gods, Jack had been busy helping others. High-rank awakeners like him were supposed to protect civilians and cities from monsters. It helped Jack strengthen his foundation to a high degree. There were only a few Empyrean rank awakeners who could defeat Jack back then, but it delayed his progression speed. Due to the day-to-day fights, his foundation became solid, but it slowed down his ranking up speed. This time, Jack, already knowing how to lay a perfect foundation, could focus on ranking up as fast as possible. It's the best idea. Jack grinned. His smile, however, suddenly stiffened. What about the academy? I doubt they will allow us to go on the excavation for months. Second semester students can go for missions outside the academy if there is a senior looking over them. Ask Amelia. I doubt she will refuse you guys, Neo replied. If she refuses, I will ask someone from the student council. That should work. Jack talked with Neo a bit more before he left. The door creaked as it opened and closed, leaving Neo alone in the room. Neo stretched his neck. I guess I've completed my tasks here. I can go to the underworld finally now, Neo muttered to himself, standing up. He reached for his Grim Reaper badge and pulled it out. I wonder if this thing works. The timeline had changed and Neo technically was no longer a Grim Reaper. The badge, which once allowed him to travel between the underworld and the world of the living, was not supposed to work. But there was a chance someone among the Grim Reapers remembered Neo becoming a Grim Reaper and saved the 73rd Grim Reaper position for him. Let's see if this thing works. Just as Neo was about to use the badge, a sudden sound interrupted him. Multiple screens appeared before his eyes. Status screen update completed. User Neo Hargraves can now view his status profile. Neo raised his brows. This thing finally upgraded. He wondered why the update had taken so long. As far as he knew, it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. No point in thinking about things I can't find the answer for, Neo said. It's better if I focus on important things. Status. Chapter 354 Status Screen, Information about Sacred Treasures. Rows of text materialized before Neo. Neo Hargraves. Rank. Half-step Ascension. The World. World Core Rank. NA. World Energy Rank. Stage 1. Stats. Strength. 5451. Speed. 5,567. Dexterity. 5,765. Constitution. 5,970. Luck. 0. Affinity. Death, shadow, darkness, void, water, time, life, holy. Magic spells. Necrotic touch. Ocean's embrace. Essence breath. Rewind enchantment. Black dawn of despair. Shadow jump. Shadow space. Incantations. O death, be my hands, crush my enemies. O death, become my blade. O shadows, by my will, appear and spy, a fleeting shade beneath the sky. O shadows, from the abyss where terrors dwell, emerge, claws of night, fangs of dread, by my hand, thy leash is led. O shadows, beast of twilight, bound by shade, guardian of the dark cascade. With fangs of night and eyes that gleam, arise, Shadowfang, from my dream. O darkness, mark this soul with night's despair, break their courage, leave them bare. O darkness, steal their breath, make their strength decay. Trait, monarch of death, mind invasion, quest, complete Barbados, training part 2, completed 0/1. Sacred treasures. Skyfall, Obidus incomplete. His stats were in upper brackets among Paragon rank demigods. Half-step ascension. Seems like this is the name of my ascender rank. Neo looked at the screen carefully. But what is this, the world, and why is its name a question mark? World energy rank and world core rank were present within the world section. His world core was written as an A. In other words, he did not have a world core. Seems like I was right. Ascenders need to create a world core for themselves. How though? Neo could ask Primogenitor. But the skill had 6 of its slots locked due to his questions. Only 1 slot remained free. If Neo messed up again by asking a weird question, his last 7th slot would be locked forever. Then, until he could complete a modification, he wouldn't be able to level up his Primogenitor skill. I want to punch my past self for choosing this damned skill. Sure, it gives the answers. But those answers are always fucking weird. An example was this. Q. What would be the best way to create the 9th form of the divine swordsmanship? Ans. Have a sword intent strong enough to split a STAGE-0 world. The old Earth was a STAGE-0 planet. Neo, if he tried hard, could destroy a planet of that level with a single attack. Unfortunately, for this question, he had to use sword intent. However, what the fuck was sword intent? Neo had tried to create this sword intent for centuries. Spoilers, he had been unsuccessful so far. I will ask about this ascender thing from Velkaria. Neo could not let Velkaria out of his shadow space. Her presence would alert everyone in the vicinity. In the academy, the principal sealed the room when Neo let out Velkaria. He could not do it here. Guess I need to go meet Velkaria. Neo used his shadow affinity. His shadows started to burn. Wisps of black and dark blue smoke wrapped around him. They pulled him into his shadow space. Neo appeared in an endlessly large space. A destroyed planet floated in the center. It was the Earth Neo brought from the shadow trial. His feet gently landed on the ground. He looked at the thousand-eyed pillar in front of him. What brings you here? I wanted to ask about the Ascenders. Sure, go ahead. Velkaria answered, half yawning. Between, can you bring something for recreation here? I'm bored here all the time. Neo looked at the angel of outer God with a complicated gaze. Why was it talking as if they were friends? Velkaria spoke as if it had read Neo's mind. Your friends are alive in the past. Besides, you already saw them die thousands of times. Your anger against me should have been soothed over after those countless loops. Neo anger should have been soothed over due to the passage of time. He neither refused nor agreed to Angel's thoughts. He was working with Velkaria as it was beneficial for him. Otherwise, he would have killed the angel as painfully as possible. Neo clicked his tongue. You don't have a humanoid body. Half of the recreational games won't work for you. That's right. Velkaria spoke thoughtfully. What about something that will help me sing? That way I can learn this planet's language and pass the time too. You like singing. Back where I come from, everyone used to love my voice. You have a killer voice for sure. Until now, Velkaria was projecting its thoughts inside Neo's head. It was similar to telepathic communication. This mental telepathy ability allowed Velkaria to talk to others, understand what they were saying, and bombard their mind with mental attacks. Tell me about Ascenders now. What about them? How do I form a world core for myself, and what is the world? The hundreds of eyes on the pillar blinked. They looked around as if Velkaria was wondering how to put her thoughts into words. I will explain about the world first. Ascenders are similar to worlds as in they can create their own energy. Velkaria continued. Awakeners connect with the world. As they reach higher elemental mastery, they need to connect with their world's core to manifest and deploy their elements, true domain, and sanctuary. Ascenders can do the same, but they do it differently. Velkaria paused. She thought about her next words before adding. Ascenders are a world themselves. They connect with the world that exists within them and use it to manifest their elements, true domain, and sanctuary. You mean, yes, the world is the name of your world. However, since you haven't created a world core yet, your world hasn't been completely formed yet, so it has no name. Neo brows furrowed. It seemed Heavenbreakers were far more unique than he had given them credit for. How do I create a world core? I don't know. What? Velkaria became ticked off when it heard Neo's tone. Do I look like a Heavenbreaker to you? Don't change the topic. Does it look like my mom is a Heavenbreaker? Or do you think my uncle is one? Neo gave Velkaria a deadpan stare. He decided to remain silent and let it speak. I don't know any Heavenbreaker. They are legendary beings you hear from stories. Why the fuck do you think I would know how they form rank up? The information about Heavenbreakers Velkaria knew came from the legends and from what she heard from her seniors. Her knowledge was superficial at best. I see. Neo nodded. So you are fucking useless. Neo decided to ignore Velkaria and focused on his status screen. A thought came up to him. If Ascenders were similar to a world, maybe they had a similar way to rank up. How does a world rank up? He asked Velkaria. By using a sacred treasure. Velkaria explained. A world needed to consume a sacred treasure to evolve and rank up. Sacred treasures were born naturally within a world. What do you mean, born naturally? It's exactly like what I said. A world can't create a sacred treasure just because it wants to. The sacred treasure is born over countless years. It's like a tree creating a fruit. In this case, when the fruit, sacred treasure, reaches maturity, the tree, world, eats the fruit and ranks up. Neo nodded. He would try asking more people about it. Maybe his dad would know more. Neo's gaze went back to his status. He opened the section of Elemental Masteries. Chapter 355 Neo's Elemental Masteries. Death. Mastery. Savon, High. Concept. Eternal Sleep. Darkness. Mastery. Savon, High. Concept. True Darkness. Time. Mastery. Savon, High. Concept. Nullhour. Water. Mastery. Savon, Mid. Concept. Aqua Nile. Shadow. Mastery. Adept Peak. Concept. 60%. Life. Mastery. Adept Peak. Concept. 20%. Holy. Mastery. Adept Peak. Concept. 0%. Sub-ranks of masteries are lowest, low, mid, high, peak. I got quite a few masteries back already. His mastery of death, darkness, and time had returned to what it was before he gave everything away to Daniel. Water was only a single sub-rank away. For shadow element, he was creating a new concept. His previous concept was not weak, but he gained a new understanding of the shadow element when he saw the supreme deity of shadows. Shadows are one, he muttered. He frowned. The words he had spoken did not embody his concept perfectly. I guess my concept would have been completed if I could put it in words. Neo's gaze shifted to his masteries of the life element and the holy element. These elements, Neo's concept of life and holy, were not very useful for healing. It was similar to how his concept of death killed by putting others to sleep, which, strictly speaking, wasn't killing. His concepts for life and holy were not for healing and purification either. This was why he was hesitating for life and holy elements. Should he regain his previous concept or try to create a new concept for both? I can't be careless. If I mess up, I won't be able to heal Elizabeth. Neo clicked his tongue. His gaze went back to his mastery of death, darkness, and time. Hey, Velkaria, what is it? How do I reach the peak of an element's Savon mastery? My masteries have been stuck on Savon High for centuries. You need the world's permission to reach Savon and manifest a domain. Until expert, your masteries must have come from your hard work and talent. But from Savon, you need to serve the world and hope it bestows you the masteries. Neo's expression darkened. So the mastery won't increase no matter how much we train? No, not exactly. The masteries won't increase unless you train and have the world's blessing. You need both. Just having one won't be enough. Velkaria's mood soured as it explained how masteries worked. During the shadow trial, Neo could never reach Savan mastery after the world core was destroyed. It was why Velkaria was not worried about his infinite revival. No matter how much he ranked up, he could not kill Velkaria unless he became a god or angel. The gods were already dead after Velkaria destroyed the world core, so Neo couldn't become an angel. His only choice was becoming a god to defeat Velkaria. However, Neo could not become a god. To reach godhood, one needed to go beyond supreme mastery in an element. This put Neo in a difficult position. The world core had been destroyed, and it was impossible for him to increase his elemental mastery. In other words, he could never become a god. It was a checkmate for Neo. It should have been a checkmate. But no, this fucker chose a third path. Since he couldn't become an angel or a god, he became an ascender. Velkaria wanted to cry. She had seen a lot of geniuses. Neo was not one of them. But she would rather face 100 genius than face Neo again. What are you talking about? Nothing. Velkaria decided to change the topic. You are saying your mastery is Savan already. Yes, most are high Savan. That's weird. You shouldn't have been able to reach Savan mastery without the help of your planet's world core. Reaching Savan mastery, even if only lowest, is what allows someone to create a domain. Maybe it's because I'm an ascender. Yeah, it might be that. Neo thought about it. It seemed he didn't need the help of the world to increase his mastery of element. Unlike others, he could do it by himself since he was an ascender. But then why aren't you reaching peak mastery? It might be because I haven't created a world core yet. Neo wondered if he should use the primogenitor skill. Primogenitor would tell him how to create a world core. While busy in thoughts, he opened his primogenitor skills menu. Q1. What would be the best way to create the ninth form of the divine swordsmanship? ANS. Have a sword intent strong enough to cut a STAGE-0 world. Q2. How to become a god. ANS. Go beyond supreme mastery in any element. Q3. How do I increase my world energy generation rate with least amount of effort? ANS. Defeating an elder dragon and absorbing its heart would allow you to increase your energy generation and recovery rate. Q4. How to achieve a soul fusion transformation, divine transformation, with Obidus. ANS. All your elements need to reach same mastery. Q5. What is sword intent? ANS. Intent formed by fusing the understanding of a sword with your willpower. Q6. How do I become knowledgeable enough to create, modify and upgrade the world time spell by myself from the scratch? ANS. By entering the sea of all consciousness. Neo smiled bitterly as he stared at the questions. None of them seemed like they could be completed anytime soon. Monarch of Death. Death. Immortal. Eternal. Primogenitor. Primogenitor. Grade 1. Progress. 98%. Mind invasion. Mind invasion. Mind control. Empathetic bond. Emphatic bond. Grade 3. Allow user to share their emotions with the target through physical touch. Max emotions that can be shared at once equals 3. Progress. 60%. Empathic bond was the evolved version of mind control, which was a skill belonging to his mind invasion trait. After everyone died, Neo had no one to use his mind control on. He couldn't train his skill. His skill level had stagnated as a result. Thankfully, he had received a link lock as a quest reward long ago, and he had used the link lock to bond Monarch of Death and Mind Invasion. With link lock, as long as his higher level trait ranked up, his lower rank trait would also grow. It was how his mental control skills level increased, and it evolved into empathic bond. I guess I finally understand where my status is, Neo muttered. I shouldn't have any problem dealing with a paragon demigod. Since stage -1 gods were as strong as paragon demigod, it meant Neo was on par with stage -1 gods. However, that was only on paper. The result of the actual battles would be difficult to predict. For one, even if Neo, an ascender, could harm gods, the gods' mastery of elements were beyond supreme rank. Neo had only Savan rank mastery. But I have my swordsmanship too. In the end, he would need to fight an angel or a god to find his exact combat strength. I know a place where I can find plenty of angels. Neo took out his Grim Reaper badge and activated it. A portal made of swirling shadows appeared before him. The badge works. Neo was pleasantly surprised. He stepped into the portal. The sensation was disorienting. He felt a shift. A beat later, he was standing at the end of a giant hall. The air here was thick and heavy with dark-type elementals. At the other end, a giant three-headed dog-shaped monster sat. Its glowing red eyes scanned the room, each head moving independently. It looked ferocious. The monster was baring its teeth when it saw Neo. Its growl vibrated through the hall like thunder. Suddenly, it stopped, recognizing Neo. Woof. Cerberus' eyes shone, and it rushed towards Neo happily. Its massive paws thudded against the stone floor, and it wagged its tail. Neo, on the other hand, started to bleed. Cerberus' powerful intent was weighing down on him. He buckled over and his knees hit the ground. Cerberus' powerful intent was weighing down on him. He buckled over and his knees hit the ground. His heart started to beat loudly. Cerberus, he muttered as he struggled to raise his head. The air around him felt suffocating. The sheer pressure of the monster's intent was pressing down on him like a mountain. Can you do something about your intent? I think I'm going to die. Woof. Chapter 356 Cerberus. Cerberus' ears drooped when he sensed Neo's pain. The three-headed monster whimpered and tilted one of its enormous heads. Woof. Intent. Neo struggled to speak. Hold back a bit. A blind man could not be hurt by a bright flash of light, and a deaf man wouldn't be hurt by a powerful noise. Similarly, most beings never awakened their intent senses and could not sense the intent of others. Even if they did awaken senses of intent, their senses were weak. Neo, on the other hand, had trained to strengthen his intent senses for centuries. He felt like he had pressed his ear against a very powerful speaker. Cerberus' whimpers and barks rattled his brain. His knees trembled, and his vision blurred. Blood dripped from his ears and eyes, staining his clothes. I need to learn how to close my intent senses. Neo closed his eyes. He had a high mastery of intent. He was confident he could learn to close his intent senses easily. It, however, needed time. Woof. Woof. Suddenly, Cerberus' overwhelming intent receded. It was absorbed back into his massive body. Neo gasped softly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. The three-headed dog-shaped monster carefully padded towards Neo. One of its heads tilted inquisitively. Woof. Yeah, it's okay now. Neo managed to say as he wiped the blood from his face with a trembling hand. Woof. Cerberus' eyes shone with joy. He pounced on Neo. His massive tongue lolled out, and he licked Neo happily, each head taking its turn. Woof. Woof. I told you. I'm okay now. You don't need to worry. Neo smiled faintly, placing a hand on Cerberus' fur. He used his life element to heal his body. Using his blessing would heal him faster, but he wanted to train his life element. Cerberus backed away after licking Neo to his heart's content. He sat on all fours and his tail wagged at a high speed. Seeing him so happy made Neo chuckle. Neo reached out to pat the side of one of Cerberus' heads. He was surprised to see Cerberus knew basic control of intent, like retracting it into his body. However, it made sense. Even Barbados could use intent to create an illusionary clone. I guess everyone learns a thing or two when you live long enough, Neo thought. He used his water affinity to clean the blood from his clothes. Then, with a flick of his fingers, he summoned his darkness element, which devoured the bloodied water. As Neo rubbed the underchin of the three heads of Cerberus, the massive beast rumbled with contentment, his thick tails thumping lazily against the floor. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the hall creaked open, and a woman hurriedly entered. She wore a flowing black robe adorned with silver embroidery. Her golden eyes were filled with panic as she bowed deeply toward Neo. I apologize, Prince, for not being there to attend you when you arrived. Grimoire, the 56th ranked Grim Reaper and the gatekeeper of the underworld, stammered as she bit her tongue mid-sentence. I'm so. She tried to apologize again but ended up biting her tongue once more. Cerberus sighed audibly, and all three of his heads shook in unison. Neo smiled. Long time no see, Grimoire. I'm happy to meet you too, Prince, Grimoire replied nervously. Neo's reincarnation arrived in the underworld every time he died. He had the memories of his past reincarnations. But he did not remember what his reincarnations did in underworld. Maybe it was a rule to erase any memory of a soul related to underworld before they reincarnated. Neo did not remember anyone in the underworld from his past reincarnations. The Grim Reapers, however, remembered him and his reincarnations. They would always dote on Neo until it was time for him to reincarnate. Please come this way, Prince. Grimoire led him to the terrace. The terrace was quite large. It had black marble flooring and a nice view over the city. Cerberus lay sprawled near Neo. Although his duty was to guard the gate of the underworld alongside Grimoire, he wanted to spend some time with Neo than in the hall below. She served him a cup of tea. Neo picked it up. Is the tea to your liking, Prince? Grimoire asked, standing dutifully beside him. It is, but we can talk while sitting. No. There is no need for you to stand, Neo suggested. I dare not do that, Grimoire replied. Neo shook his head before he turned his gaze downward. From the terrace, he could see the sprawling city of Cobalt Spring. The city was alive with activity, with figures of monsters and humans moving through the streets. Cobalt Spring was one of the largest Reaper cities in the Forest of All Beginnings. It's a nice city, Neo commented, taking a sip of tea. It's all thanks to the soul hunters who help us in maintaining the law and order, Grimoire replied with a hint of pride in her voice as she glanced at the bustling city below. Neo chuckled. Law and order needed to be maintained even in the underworld. While he was drinking tea, a question arose in Neo's mind. Why is my Grim Reaper badge working? I thought Count Andromalius would be the 73rd ranked Grim Reaper since the timeline was changed and I did not become a Grim Reaper. It's as you said. The position of the 73rd ranked Grim Reaper belongs to Andromalius, Grimoire explained. But he gave it up when he found that in one of the timelines, he had passed his position to you. Only 81 Grim Reapers could exist at once. The Grim Reapers would choose talented soul hunters as their successors and pass on their position to them. Neo had been Count Andromalius's successor during the Age of Gods. Back then, at Count Andromalius's request, Neo had put him into eternal sleep before taking his position. Count Andromalius cried tears of joy when he found out the second prince was his successor, Grimoire commented. He bragged to Duke Belial and Marquis Zagan about it. Grimoire coughed and added. In fact, he went ahead and made sure everyone knew the news. He knew the news would make most Grim Reapers envious of him, and he couldn't let go of a chance like this. That's just like him, Neo said. What is Count Andromalius doing now? He is waiting for you before he leaves, Grimoire replied, lowering her gaze slightly as a sign of respect. Leaves. Once a Grim Reaper passed on their position, they would do one of three things. Enter the cycle of samsara, reincarnation, enter chrono sleep, or overload their core and scatter into the world as pure energy, in other words, true death. I see, Neo nodded. I will visit him soon. The gentle rustling of Cerberus's fur as he shifted nearby filled the brief silence. Neo talked a bit more with Grimoire. He exchanged small pleasantries about the state of the underworld and the soul hunters. Before he stood up, he gazed at the map Grimoire had handed him. Are you sure I will find Leonora here? Neo asked. Yes, Prince. Leonora von Villers has made a huge name for herself as a soul hunter during the past months, Grimoire replied confidently. Her team should be in Solace City right now. Thanks for the information. It was my pleasure. Grimoire bowed deeply. Neo left the city. He used Shadow Jump to move at a high speed. Solace City was quite far. It took him 4 days to reach it. Along the way, he passed through berserk monsters, Reaper cities, and destroyed ruins. He moved toward the Soul Hunter building after he reached Solace City. Inside, there was a huge line of soul hunters and civilians, all waiting for their turn to speak with the staff. The hall was bustling with activity. Neo was allowed to skip the line when he revealed his Grim Reaper badge. He strode to the front and met with the receptionist at the counter. I greet the second prince, the humanoid monster with the head of a fist said eloquently. What can I help you with today? I'm looking for Leonora von Villers, Neo said. Chapter 357 Meeting Leonora. Looking for me? Neo heard a familiar voice. He turned around and saw Leonora. She had grown, emotionally and physically, after spending months in Underworld. Physically, the biggest change were the 2 thick horns on her forehead. Oh. Her eyes widened, and she let out a smile. Neo. Yeah, it's me. Leonora passed a bag to the spider-shaped monster next to her. Can you get these materials checked on the counter while I talk to him? Leonora spoke to the spider monster, Celine, who was her teammate. Oh okay. Celine answered, her voice trembling slightly. Leonora beckoned Neo to come out of the building to talk and went out first. Neo followed behind her. As he passed Celine, he spoke up, it's nice to see you. Same. Celine struggled to speak. Neo's aura was too powerful. The others in the hall were the same, unable to handle Neo's presence. Even though he kept his presence at a minimum at all times, he was still a heavenbreaker. It was normal for low-ranked beings to feel afraid of him. The outside air was cooler. Neo found Leonora at the stall next to the Reaper building. Celine is your teammate now? He asked as he approached her. Yes, we became teammates when I found her along with Gwen. Gwen, how did you find her? Before Neo entered the Shadow Trail, he had met Celine in Underworld. Together, they had defeated a powerful monster who managed to turn Gwen D. Langley and Kendrick D. Valemont into his puppets. I was searching for Gwen and Kendrick, and, Neo nodded while listening to her explanation. Gwen D. Langley, Leonora von Villers, Kendrick D. Vailmont, Christian von Hasberg. These four died during the S-rank Shadow Window mission. Among them, Christian entered the cycle of reincarnation after being judged by the jury of End. Kendrick entered the cycle of reincarnation after Neo used judgment on him. Gwen was in Leonora's soul hunter team. Leonora had become a successful soul hunter, thanks to her sky-high talent. At the pace she was progressing, she could soon become a disciple of a Grim Reaper. In fact, she had completed the requirements to become a disciple already. Right now, she was waiting for a Grim Reaper to approach her and make her their student. I thought you were dead too, Leonora spoke. Why? Neo asked. The two strolled the streets while chatting. Gwen said she saw you in Underworld. I asked Celine, and she said the same. Leonora paused before she continued. But I never found your name on bulletin boards. Names and pictures of souls who arrived in Underworld were posted on bulletin boards. Soul hunters would choose one of the souls for their mission and find them before the souls got turned into monsters due to Underworld's corruption. I never found out why your name was missing, and the Grim Reapers refused to answer, Leonora said. She scratched her cheek with a smile and added, I was worried something might have happened to you. It's good you are safe. Neo found it surprising that Leonora was taking the initiative to locate her Academy friends and protect them in Underworld. She must have matured after her death. Neo didn't know how to feel about it. Should he be happy she matured, or feel conflicted because that maturity came through suffering? Leonora's expression was calm, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that hadn't been there before. Neo couldn't help but notice how much she had changed. I am the son of Hades, and I can travel freely between Underworld and the world of the living, Neo explained. My name was not on the bulletin boards since I never died. So that's why the Grim Reapers were hiding information about you. Leonora smiled bitterly. She didn't say how she had been snooping around the residence of Grim Reapers and other officials. She had been worried they were using Neo's soul for something nefarious, and it was the reason why they were hiding information about him. You don't look surprised by my bloodline, Neo said. I am surprised. It's just that I'm more relieved that you are safe. The two continued to talk on the stroll. It seemed like Leonora had settled in the Underworld perfectly. When some time passed, Neo decided to be direct. Do you want to return to the world of the living? No. For the first time today, he saw Leonora's smile disappear. Her face scrunched up. I don't want to go back there. Too much work in that world. Quote. Neo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just when he was thinking she had matured, she said she didn't want to return as they would make her work in the world of the living. Isn't being a soul hunter work too? He asked. It is. But here, I can take a mission, spend 7 days resting, and use 1 day to finish my task, and no one complains. Leonora's tone was light, but her eyes held a glimmer of mischief. Neo couldn't help but chuckle at her response, realizing that while she had grown, some parts of her carefree nature remained unchanged. You sure you don't want to be resurrected? He asked again. Yes, I'm sure. Besides, it will become a problem for you if you broke the rules of Underworld and tried to revive me, Leonora answered. Even though she said that, Neo could tell the main reason was not her concern for him, but her reluctance to work. She had always hated the unnecessary attention she got as the child of the Poseidon clan's clan leader. Suddenly, Leonora frowned. Neo didn't use intent to read her thoughts, but he could guess what she was thinking. Why did her father, who used to dote on her, not try to rescue her? Poseidon clan had the highest number of time mages. They could have saved Leonora from dying. Of course, Leonora was happy she wasn't saved, but it didn't change the fact that something was wrong. What about Gwen? Neo asked. I doubt she wants to be resurrected either. Why? She says she wants to find you and kill you for killing Kendrick. Until then, she be Grim Reaper or monster or anything that lets her remain in Underworld. Chapter 358 True Names. Neo had a dumbfounded expression. She wants to kill me. Yes, Leonora replied with a bitter smile. She thinks you killed Kendrick and wants revenge. But I reincarnated him. That was what he wanted too. Gwen doesn't know that, Leonora said softly. In Gwen's eyes, Neo had killed Kendrick brutally. Her anger was justified in her mind. Leonora noticed Neo's troubled expression. She reached out and patted his back sympathetically. It's better if you don't meet Gwen now. She is quite motivated about her revenge. Neo sighed and nodded slowly. I doubt she will listen to you if you tell her that you didn't kill Kendrick, Leonora added. That sounds about right, Neo admitted. Leonora immediately spoke enthusiastically, trying to lighten the mood before it could worsen. Don't worry. I will try to tell her that you might have helped Kendrick pass on, instead of killing him. It's better to change her mind over time than to try to do it abruptly. Yeah, it seemed he would have to postpone meeting Gwen and asking her if she wanted to be resurrected. Listening to Leonora, though, made it clear Gwen had no intention of resurrection, revenge or not. The duo talked for a long while. A faint chill lingered in the air, making Leonora pull her cloak tighter around herself as she laughed softly. She began to narrate her experiences in the underworld. Underworld was quite surprising, she said. Her voice was light and melodious. The amount of dark energies in the underworld is too high. Anyone who comes here turns into a monster. Only those with high mastery in dark type elements or holy or light elements are somewhat immune to monsterization. Neo glanced at her horns with a side eye while she was not paying attention. I do have the holy element, but when I came here, my mastery was barely apprentice rank. If I didn't find a unique breathing technique, I might have become a monster by now, she explained. Unique breathing technique? Neo questioned. Yes, Leonora replied. My breathing technique turns all the dark type elements I breathe into physical substance. These horns. She gestured to the curved, black horns atop her head. These are the impurities everyone breathes in the underworld. I just turned them into these. Neo was impressed. It seemed a Grim Reaper had recognized her talent and decided to invest in her. They must have given the breathing technique to her. Seems like you are lucky. It wouldn't take long before a Grim Reaper takes you in as their disciple. That reminds me. She looked him in the eye. How did you become a Grim Reaper? I thought Grim Reapers all had expert mastery in their main elements at the minimum. The last meeting between Leonora and Neo was a few weeks ago. Back then, Neo's rank had been an awakened demigod. On average, elemental mastery was harder to gain than ranking up. By the time one reached expert mastery in an element, they would typically be paragon demigods. But Neo was only an awakened demigod. Mythic, if Leonora gave him the benefit of the doubt. Neo's lips curved into a slight grin. I'm an Empyrean now. That explains how you are. Wait, you are what rank? Empyrean demigod. Her eyes widened momentarily before she looked him up and down. Then, with a sigh, she waved a hand dismissively. Forget it. I don't want to know how you did it. I feel like it will give me a headache. Neo chuckled at her very, Leonora-like, response. They talked a bit more before he decided it was time to leave. See you later, he said. Bye. Leonora waved, her horns catching the light once more as she smiled. And don't worry about Gwen. I'll talk to her. Neo nodded and left the Solace City. The cool breeze of the forest greeted him as he stepped out of the city's gates. The dense canopy of leaves overhead cast dappled shadows on the dirt path below. The faint chirping of birds echoed in the distance, mingling with the rustling of leaves. Now that I'm done with this, it's time I focus on my life and holy elements, Neo muttered to himself. He walked through the forest, deep in thought. Not just my elements, I need to rank up my traits, train to increase my stats, and focus on other elements too. A frown tugged at his lips as he cocked his head. Funnily enough, after returning from the shadow trial, Neo was starting to feel an itch. This world was safe. For now at least. But it made Neo restless. He didn't want the embrace of safety. He wanted to fight. It was when he was pushed to his limits that he grew fastest. He enjoyed that feeling. If I can go somewhere I can find a lot of strong enemies, it would be best. I can use true darkness to gain their talents, stats, traits and elemental mastery, and I will be able to fight to my heart's content while doing it. But, since my luck is dogshit, I need to devour a lot of beings to get what I want. Neo stopped as he weighed his options. He needed a place with countless powerful enemies, all of them paragons at least. Weak opponents wouldn't give him anything. Damn it, a place like that isn't easy to find. Paragons aren't leaves that grow on trees, he muttered bitterly. He sighed deeply, his breath misting in the cool air. Seems like I can only focus on holy and life elements for now and train other elements later. As his steps brought him closer to the edge of the forest, another idea struck him. There was another option if Neo wanted to train everything at once. Maybe Dad would know of a good place, he murmured. After days of travel, the dense canopy of the forest gave way to an open, sandy beach. The sound of crashing waves filled the air. Neo stepped onto the beach, his feet sinking slightly into the grainy, blank sand. The blood sea stretched before him. Its crimson waters churned and glistened endlessly. The blood sea was a unique phenomenon, existing both in the world of the living and the underworld. Unlike in the world of the living, where a single supercontinent existed at its center, the underworld's blood sea was dotted with multiple small continents and countless islands. The forest of all beginnings was one of these continents. Far across the sea lay Styxhaven, the continent where the monarch, Hades, resided. Styxhaven was also home to the Jury of End, the sacred place where all souls were judged. Neo's eyes flickered as he thought of the powerful forces residing there. Normally, anyone wishing to cross the blood sea would need to board the nether ships. They were ghostly vessels that ferried travelers dead and the living alike, across the perilous waters of Blood Sea. However, they were slow. It would take months to travel using nether ships. Neo smirked faintly. He had a better method. Veldora Elowen Starfall. Neo muttered. Come. A powerful roar ripped through the forest, shaking the very earth beneath Neo's feet. Birds, if they could be called that, with their shadowy forms and glowing black eyes, took flight, screeching in fear. The winds howled violently, tearing through the dense canopy above. Leaves swirled in a chaotic dance, and the ground trembled. The distant blood sea churned wildly. Its crimson waves crashed against the sandy shore in a frenzy. The sky darkened further, as if bowing to the arrival of something truly monumental. From the horizon, a massive, gleaming figure shot through the air with terrifying speed. The ancient dragon, Veldora, descended upon the forest. Its scales shimmered like liquid obsidian, each one etched with faint, glowing runes. Its red eyes burned with intelligence as it locked onto Neo. The dragon's presence was suffocating. From Paragon rank onward, one became a special existence. It was not simply an increase in stats and skills. It was an evolution of existence. One's very essence ascended to a higher plane of existence when they reached the Paragon rank and above. Many changes followed after reaching such heights. One of the most notable was the true name. The names of Paragon demigods and Stage 1 gods held unique power. Simply uttering their true name could alert them of the fact that someone was talking about them. For exalted demigods and Stage 2 gods, the power of their true name was even more terrifying. Unless you were at least Paragon rank yourself, you couldn't hear the true name of an exalted demigod and Stage 2 gods. If you somehow managed to hear it, you would die. You would be crushed under the weight of their existence. Chapter 359 The All-Seeing Eye. The power of true names was not something to be trifled with. Veldora came as soon as his true name, which only a few handful knew, was uttered. I greet the second prince. The dragon bowed his massive head. He had retracted his intent presence a while ago when he realized it was harmful to Neo. The air, once suffocating under the weight of Veldora's overwhelming aura, felt lighter, almost calm. Seeing him like this, Neo smiled faintly. When Neo first arrived in the underworld, the wandering giant, Neromax, an exalted rank monster, had taken his blood. Back then, Neo had heard that the ancient dragon Veldora, who had been sleeping for centuries, suddenly woke up. The rumors spread like wildfire that Veldora and Neromax were fighting. Neo had thought they were fighting for his blood. But now he knew the truth. Veldora was attacking Neromax because the wandering giant had tried to drink Neo's, Veldora's protege blood. It's nice to meet you too, Neo said. Prince, have you called us because you wish to meet the monarch? Veldora asked. He could fly at a high speed. It would lessen the time of travel by several weeks. Yes, Neo nodded. I hope I'm not overstepping my boundaries by asking you, an ancient dragon, to give me a ride. Not at all, Prince. It is my pleasure to serve you. Veldora lowered his colossal body. The ground beneath them quivered gently. With a moment's hesitation, Neo climbed onto the dragon's back, settling between the ridges of his scales. The texture was surprisingly smooth, yet firm like tempered steel. A few seconds later, the ancient dragon took flight. His ascent was breathtaking. The ground quaked as his wings unfurled. Their sheer size blotted out the skies above. A single beat of those mighty wings sent a gust of wind cascading through the forest and sea. Whoa! Neo muttered, amazed. His hair whipped wildly as they rose higher and higher. A single flap of Veldora's wing could, and would, crush the entire forest. Yet no trees were uprooted, not a single branch snapped in their wake. Veldora's control was beyond masterclass. It was perfect. Don't be surprised just yet, Prince. There is a lot more for you to see, Veldora chuckled. He flapped again, and his body shot forward with an explosive burst of speed. The forest of all beginning disappeared behind them in an instant. The dense fog that once shrouded the forest thinned, replaced by the vast expanse of the blood sea that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sea's surface glistened darkly, as if a million crimson eyes stared back at Neo. How fast are we flying? Neo couldn't tell their speed. The air around them was eerily still, with no drag or turbulence. Wherever he turned, his gaze met the ominous crimson waters of the Blood Sea. There was nothing that would allow him to compare their speed. With nothing to do on the journey, Neo decided to train. He closed his eyes and meditated. Intent. Neo had to learn how to close his intent senses. It wasn't hard. He could more or less do it already. The problem is balance. If Neo closed all his intent senses, he would become blind. After all, his physical eyes did not work. He had to figure out how to close his intent senses but leave them open just enough so he could still see. Let's try it. Neo focused on the intent of the surroundings. The air was filled with intent of death, darkness, destruction, despair, nightmare, fear, blood, curse, and more. These intents originated from their respective elementals. Neo found it marvelous how elementals, who weren't dead or alive, had their own intent. The Blood Sea had similar intent, only countless times more sinister. The intent filled with deep-seated grudge was the most prominent within the Blood Sea. Veldora had his own intent too. His thoughts created intent, his body created intent, his existence created intent. All those intents were different. The intent of thoughts revealed his inner musings. The intent of body told Neo what his body was made of, what it was capable of, and what it was weak against. The intent of existence told Neo the past of Veldora. Neo focused on these threads of intent and looked inside them. The ancient dragon, when young, only an infant wyvern, met the second prince of death. The two became friends, helped each other, and were eventually separated when the second prince had to reincarnate. The young wyvern had cried. He didn't want to be separated from the second prince, but the Grim Reapers, cold and emotionless, did not listen. Their decision was absolute, and the young wyvern's protests fell on deaf ears. The wyvern could not stop the second prince's reincarnation. Back then, he had vowed his loyalty to the prince, tears streaming from his eyes, and he promised he would grow stronger. He swore that the next time they met, he would protect the second prince, no matter what. That young wyvern was now known as the ancient dragon Veldora. He had indeed become strong. But he couldn't help the second prince. Every time he saw the prince reincarnate, he would be reminded of his own failures. Of how, despite his strength and power, he could not keep his vow. It's not your fault, Neo said as he read Veldora's intent. Veldora cared deeply for Neo. It was why the ancient dragon allowed Neo to read all of his intent, even his weaknesses. It was his way of giving Neo something more, materials to study, tools to strengthen himself. No one would do anything like this. Most people did not know about intent. But those who did, like Veldora, knew how dangerous it was to let the other party read their intent. If the other party held sinister thoughts, they could cripple Veldora easily. Veldora, however, was no worried. He trusted Neo. Days turned into weeks as they traveled. Neo kept trying to find the perfect balance for his intense senses. He sat cross-legged atop Veldora's back. He worked to limit the overwhelming flood of intent from his surroundings. The intent of death, despair, and fear pressed against him like an invisible tide, but he slowly learned to control how much of it he absorbed. How is your training progressing, Prince? Veldora's deep voice rumbled, breaking the long silence. I can manage the balance of my senses now. It's not perfect, but it will have to do for now. Fine-tuning the balance will take a lot of time, Neo replied, opening his eyes. Since Neo had managed to find a somewhat good balance, he no longer needed to divert all his attention to training. He talked with Veldora during his free time. Since Neo had managed to find a somewhat good balance, he no longer needed to divert all his attention to training. He talked with Veldora during his free time. There is something I've been curious about since the beginning, Neo said. We would answer everything we can, Prince. Please ask your question without hesitation. What's that in the sky? Neo pointed at the three eyes that hung in the sky of Underworld. They seemed to observe everything in the Underworld with their unblinking gaze. During the past few days, Neo felt like those eyes had been paying him particularly more attention. Chapter 360 Palace of the Monarch. It's the ability of the first-ranked Grim Reaper, Grand Duke Bale, Veldora explained. First-ranked? You mean the oldest Grim Reaper? Neo questioned. Grand Duke Bale was a legendary figure. He was called the Sword of Night. And the bastard Grim Reaper. No one had seen Bale in centuries. He had disappeared long ago, leaving behind myths of his unmatched power. If not for the all-seeing eye that hangs in the sky of the underworld, everyone would have thought Grand Duke Bael had perished somewhere, Veldora said. Funnily enough, no one was concerned about Bael's absence. He was so strong that it was impossible for him to be defeated. Everyone assumed that his disappearance was voluntary. They predicted he had gone missing as he didn't want to work and was hiding somewhere, hence his infamous title, the Bastard Grim Reaper. Veldora continued to glide smoothly through the dark skies of the underworld. As they traveled, Veldora explained about a lot of things to Neo. We call the continents of the underworld houses. Neo listened intently. The Forest of All Beginnings is the name of the house connected to Luminara, the supercontinent where you live on Earth. Anyone who dies on Luminara comes to the Forest of All Beginnings. Neo wasn't surprised. Thanks to the novels he had read, he knew about the existence of the other supercontinents. Those who die on other supercontinents of Earth come to different houses in the underworld, Veldora elaborated. He continued his explanation. Souls from different supercontinents come to a different house. In fact, each house of the underworld is connected to a different planet. The smaller houses are connected to Earth's supercontinents, while the larger houses are connected to other planets. Neo's eyes widened slightly at the revelation. Even a small house is larger than the supercontinent Luminara where you live. They're called small only because the other houses are much larger, Veldora explained. Our underworld is connected to other planets too? Neo asked, surprised. Information about the underworld was rarely told in the novel. Most of the things he knew about it came from what other Grim Reapers had told him. Indeed, more than a dozen other worlds are connected to the underworld, Veldora said. Earth's underworld is unique. We judge the mortals belonging to our home and the ones from outside too. His words made Neo's curiosity grow. He couldn't help but wonder. How could Hades rule over so many worlds? How strong must he have been to accomplish such a feat? While Neo was lost in thought, the ancient dragon opened his mouth again. If the prince wishes to visit other worlds, you can do so by going to a different house and using your Grim Reaper badge there. The gate of the underworld will open in the world of the living connected to that house. Neo nodded. The two continued to talk until they reached Styxhaven. The continent of Styxhaven was immense. Its borders stretched as far as Neo's eyes could see, merging with the horizon where the unending night of the underworld met the endless sky. The ground below was a barren wasteland of blackened soil cracked with deep fissures that glowed faintly with an ominous red hue. Along the continent's borders stood towering gateposts. Each gatepost was spaced a few hundred miles apart. The gateposts were massive structures carved from obsidian, etched with runes that shimmered faintly with a spectral glow. Nether ships from different houses docked at the own gateposts. The souls of the dead disembarked from the ships. Neo watched as the souls formed unfathomably long lines, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Grim Reaper disciples patrolled the area. They made sure no soul caused trouble or attempted to escape. Veldora flew over the land, casting a shadow over the blackened soil. Neo's gaze swept across the landscape. Unlike other continents, Styxhaven was devoid of any vegetation or infrastructure. Veldora flew toward a location where all the lines of souls seemed to converge. That's the Colosseum of End, Veldora said. They stopped before a massive, majestic Colosseum. The structure was carved from a material darker than night. Its towering walls were adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and writhe continuously. Since the top of the Colosseum was open, Neo could everything below. The center of the Colosseum was a massive pit surrounded by tiered seating, where countless souls gathered, waiting for their turn to be judged. Veldora made sure he wasn't flying directly overhead the Colosseum. Flying over it was considered disrespectful. He hovered slightly to the side. Neo's gaze fixed below. The three judges, collectively called the jury of End, sat atop high, throne-like platforms. Dark cloaks obscured their figures. Each judge radiated an overwhelming aura of authority and power. Each moment, a soul would step into the center stage of the Colosseum. The three judges would delve into the memories of the soul before them. The process was quick but thorough. Judgment led to one of three outcomes: punishment, reincarnation, or true death. As Neo watched, the three judges paused their work briefly. Their heads tilted upward. They gave a slight bow before immediately returning to their tasks. Neo raised a brow, curious. Please do not be angry, Prince, Veldora said. The judges do not have time to rest. They cannot spare more than a few moments to greet you. They don't have time to rest. Neo questioned. Only a few are capable of watching the memories of thousands of souls every hour and staying sane, Veldora said. Neo looked down at the judges again. He knew how difficult it was to maintain ego after looking through memories of hundreds of souls. Those three below are the only ones who can do it. That's why they work without rest, or the flow of souls will be halted, Veldora said. There were countless souls waiting to be judged. And there were only 3 judges. In other words, the underworld was short-staffed. Their mental resilience must be insanely high if they can work for centuries without rest, Neo thought. After he had watched the process for a while, Veldora flapped his wings, taking to the skies once more. The air around them shimmered faintly with the residual energy of the Colosseum as they moved away. They flew toward the back of the Colosseum of End, where no lines of souls were present. The barren land below stretched endlessly, broken only by occasional cracks that glowed faintly with a crimson light. Hours passed as they continued their journey. Far into the distance, a massive structure began to take shape on the horizon. A giant palace emerged. Its sheer scale left Neo momentarily speechless. The structure was made entirely of black marble and its surface was polished to perfection. The palace stood tall and imposing, its spires piercing the dark heavens. Ornate carvings adorned its walls, depicting scenes of judgment and the flow of souls. That's the palace where the monarch rests, Veldora said, his tone carrying a hint of reverence. It's beautiful, Neo muttered. That it is, Veldora
replied. He landed at the foot of the palace. The ground beneath them was paved with smooth, obsidian tiles that reflected their forms like a dark mirror.